Chapter 460. They found a high-end restaurant and chatted as they ate. Were you the ones who saved Jimmy? Are you all superheroes? Did you know him before? The him Louise was referring to was naturally Clark. Her IQ wasn't low, and being a reporter was a profession with strong analytical abilities. Superman had specifically mentioned Jimmy's incident, and connecting all the clues together, it wasn't difficult to discover the truth. Louise knew Superman's true identity, but she didn't expect that there would be a superhero among the people she knew. Furthermore, he was a billionaire. Her only question was whether both women were heroes or if one of them was. Thea and Diana looked at each other and nodded. Louise could be said to be the closest ordinary person to a superhero. Her father and her boyfriend knew about Thea's true abilities, so it was not unacceptable for them to tell her. Oh, Louise suddenly realized. So, you really saved Jimmy? Who's Jimmy? Diana did not know who Jimmy was. Thea saw that the restaurant was quiet and no one was paying attention to her. She reached out and tapped the table lightly. With a water mirror image, Jimmy Olsen's image was reflected. Diana looked at the image and felt that it was familiar. Oh, it's him. He's quite a brave person. Thea pursed her lips. This was called being dumb, okay? This was not bravery at all. Louise was completely convinced when she saw this. She curiously tapped her finger on the water mirror. Her finger was clean and there was nothing there. Seeing that they were open about it, Superman sighed in relief. What were the enemies you encountered on the island? Jimmy took a lot of pictures. Were they aliens? These things had been explained several times, and Sia was very familiar with it. She told him everything from the beginning to the end. Superman sometimes frowned and sometimes pursed his lips. When he heard that the enemies were all wiped out and that the Justice faction had won more Hercules, he felt much more relaxed. What Thea said had little impact on Superman. Whether it was gods or evil, it was the same to him. However, these things were a little unsettling to Louise. The Greek gods, the will of the world, and the Atlanteans were all contrary to her original worldview, especially when she found out that Diana was the daughter of the King of Gods, and that there was another well-known god who was currently recuperating in Metropolis. She was completely at a loss for words. Poseidon, Hercules. Superman was a little excited when he heard these names. Unlike the Martian Manhunter who had lived for hundreds of years, Superman was still a young man according to the age of the Kryptonians. It was inevitable for him to be competitive, but he also knew that it was not the right time to suggest a fight, so he suppressed the urge. Now that they had a preliminary understanding of each other, it was easy to chat. Thea was mainly concerned about Superman's recent encounters. Superman was a little puzzled when he mentioned that some unknown forces had been attacking him with missiles recently. Thea pretended to be puzzled, but she knew that Luthor had started to collect Superman's genes to make clones. To clone someone like Superman, whose genes were perfect, required a lot of preparatory work. Even with the help of the Kryptonians who had surrendered, Luthor's workload was so heavy and cumbersome that it made him lose a lot of hair. It should be known that Earth's current technological level could only clone some animals. Even someone like Sia, who had scoured space for scientific and technological knowledge, could only clone ordinary people. Mr. Luthor was too careless. He directly went for the most difficult one and chose the hell difficulty as the starting point. Sia did not know what to say, but this person actually succeeded. It was truly shocking. As for the missiles that attacked Superman, Poison Ivy controlled the plants and collected some samples without anyone noticing. Thea only took a few glances to know that Luthor was the one behind it. He had installed a lot of nanomachines on the missile warhead, coupled with invisible kryptonite needles. He was using these things to silently collect Superman cells. At present, only Thea and Luthor had the technology to use miniaturized equipment and knew how to use kryptonite. Since it wasn't Thea who did it, it went without saying who was behind it. When Thea saw the nanomachines picked up by Poison Ivy, she realized that Luthor had mastered the atomization knowledge she revealed on the spaceship. This man was really amazing. Although he didn't understand a lot of things at the time, he remembered everything Thea said on the spaceship and went home to study it. Just by looking at the nanomachines he made, she knew that he had put in a lot of effort. The only good news was Luthor's personality. He was arrogant, proud, and wanted everyone to look at him. This personality determined that he wouldn't study the atomic suit. He wanted to make an indomitable robot and beat Superman to the ground. He wouldn't become invisible to a microscope to deal with Superman. The Atomic Man's philosophy and personality were too different from his. If one day he really became invisible and unknown, he would rather die. The four of them chatted, and time passed quickly. When they said goodbye to each other, Diana hesitated for a moment and said, "I want to fight with you." Diana was unusually serious when she spoke. Thea immediately realized that she had been holding this sentence in her heart for a long time, but she just couldn't find the opportunity to say it. She believed in Diana's strength and didn't stop her. Instead, she quietly waited for Superman's response. Louise also realized the seriousness of the atmosphere. In her impression, Superman was synonymous with invincibility. She was a little excited that someone was going to challenge him today. The right to choose fell into Superman's hands. According to his heart, he wanted to fight to his heart's content, but there were too few enemies on Earth that were worthy of him fighting. The comfortable environment had eroded the warlike nature of the Kryptonian in his blood. Tonight, he first heard the story of their battle with Hercules, and then Diana wanted to fight with him. The passion in his heart finally suppressed all his worries. "Okay, I promise you, but the venue of the battle, Thea will definitely think of a way," Diana said affirmatively. Ideas flashed through Louise's mind. Space combat was the most environmentally friendly. Although both of them could survive in space, Diana obviously wasn't good at space combat, so this option was directly rejected. If they fought on Earth, Superman could continuously absorb the energy of the yellow sun, which was also unfair to Diana. Plus, the various satellite observations were too troublesome, and they caused a lot of damage to the surface. Thea felt that the two of them could deviate the planet's orbit. For the sake of the 6 billion people, Earth was also rejected. The only option left was to go to outer space. Where to go? It was best to go to a place where there was neither a yellow sun nor a red sun. Can I go and watch the battle? I haven't seen him fight with all his strength yet. Louise Ryan gave Thea another difficult problem. Superman stared at her with bright eyes. His meaning was self-evident. Thea scratched her head. There were so many restrictions, and it had to be a planet where an ordinary person like Louise could survive. Chapter 461. After much consideration, they took out the light ring to search and finally found a barren planet. The planet was extremely far away from the star and there were no signs of life. Even if the two of them deviated the planet's orbit, they were not afraid. Most importantly, there was oxygen on the planet, which was suitable for Louise, an ordinary person who was not afraid of death. After telling them about their discovery, Superman and Diana naturally agreed. They had wanted to fight for a long time, but there were too few suitable battlefields. Go to another planet? How do we get there? Louise's worldview was about to collapse as she hurriedly asked her own question. Don't worry, there's oxygen there, but there's not enough light. It's a little cold. After saying that, Thea gestured for them to go to a more secluded place. The distance was a little far, so the preparation for the teleportation would take a little longer. Calculating the distance, positioning the space, establishing a connecting passage, strengthening the magical power, stabilizing the space turbulence. This kind of long-distance teleportation was much more troublesome than teleporting inside Earth. The lady took out her staff, and a magic circle painted with purple stripes gradually appeared on the ground. Although she did not understand what it was, the highly educated Louise still felt a very complicated geometric beauty from it. All right, do you want to change your clothes? It's best if you put on your battle suits and Louise's winter clothes. Thea only thought of this when she was halfway through the magic circle. The three of them nodded in unison. Sia opened 2 portals for them, and they went back to their own homes to change their clothes. She also told them to hurry up and come back before the portals disappeared. After that, she lowered her head and continued to work on the ultra-long-distance teleportation. Louise stepped through the portal uneasily. The first time she encountered this kind of spatial displacement, she was shocked. When she came to her senses, she realized that she was already at home. She touched the tables and chairs in her house. There was no mistaking it. This was her home. She then looked back at the portal that was glowing blue. What kind of ability is this? Do you have this ability? She grabbed Superman, who was looking for her winter clothes, and asked nervously. The honest young man shook his head, indicating that he did not have this ability. Seeing that his girlfriend wanted to ask more, he could only explain, Thea's ability is mysterious. It's different from mine. That tall woman is no match for you, right? Superman didn't dare to answer this question casually. He thought about it seriously and said, I haven't fought her before, so I don't know. She is a very powerful warrior. You won't get hurt, right? It's too dangerous, so let's just forget about it. I don't think I'll lose. This battle is necessary because I'm also a warrior. Superman, who had always been obedient to his girlfriend, said resolutely. Louise understood his personality, so she naturally wouldn't try to persuade him anymore. Hearing her boyfriend say that he wouldn't lose, she felt much more relieved. Her worries disappeared, and the reporter's interest in gossip reappeared. He rubbed his chin and asked, the relationship between the two women is? Superman was not that gossipy. According to what he knew about the Kryptonians were born through genetic modification. Relationships between men and women were normal. There was nothing to be surprised about. He quickly changed into his blue clothes and red cloak, then put on a down jacket for Louise. The two of them hurriedly stepped through the portal. The moment he stepped through the portal, his attention was attracted. At this time, Diana had changed out of her flaxen short skirt. Her long hair was let down, and she was wearing her signature Greek-style armor. She carried a sword, a shield, and a silver guardian bracelet on her back. She was quietly waiting for them. The two's fighting spirit reached its peak in an instant, but they were still worried about Earth, so they forced themselves to hold back. Okay, let's go in. This is a deserted planet named Ilaru according to the universal name. It's 5 light-years away from Earth and 24 light-years away from Krypton. Thea finished drawing the portal. Unlike the blue portal that could be opened easily on Earth, this portal was purple in color. Just maintaining the portal consumed 20% of her magic power. After checking it carefully and confirming that there were no mistakes, she walked in first. Diana followed closely behind, and Superman comfortingly pulled Louise into the portal as well. The few guys with extraordinary physiques did not feel anything, but the ordinary Louise suffered greatly. It was as if she was thrown into a washing machine. Her body was fine, but her brain felt like it was violently thrown out by centrifugal force. She could not tell if it was dizziness or pain, but she felt like she was floating when she walked. It was similar to being drunk. Fortunately, Thea's magic power was far better than before. She woke up as quickly as she fainted. She shook her head and began to observe the surrounding scenery. This was a dark planet. The clouds were thick, and only a few rays of light shone on the ground between the gaps. There was no vegetation to be seen with the naked eye, and the sky seemed to be covered in sand. The environment was worse than Arabia. The only good news was that there was oxygen here, but it was very thin. She tightened her coat and came to Thea's side. She asked curiously, "There's no sun here? You said it's 5 light-years away from Earth." There's actually a star shining here, but it's very far away. Plus, the star has entered a period of decline." Looking at her nonchalance, Louise could not help but ask, "Aren't you worried about your partner? Will Miss Prince be in danger?" Thea shook her head and did not answer the question. Logically speaking, no one could defeat Superman without kryptonite. However, Diana, who was also wearing a full set of godly equipment and had reached the peak of a demigod, was only 1 step away from becoming a true god. Thea did not think that she would lose. She was actually looking forward to this battle. Seeing that she had no intention of continuing the conversation, Louise also held back her desire to speak. She only glanced at Thea's short skirt and short sleeves. Thea was dressed like she was shopping. She was a little speechless when she compared herself to her trembling in a down jacket. Thea was secretly amused. If it were anyone else, they would have already gone back. However, this curious woman had no intention of backing down. She was currently staring at the 2 people in the distance with shining eyes. "Are you good at aerial combat or ground combat?" Superman floated 3 meters above the ground and asked politely. Although Superman opened the battle calmly, Diana still read something new in his words. He was putting psychological pressure on her. She immediately retorted, "Do you prefer to fight with weapons or bare-handed combat? Then let's fight according to what we're good at." Realizing that his opponent did not want to engage in aerial combat with him, Superman was a little disappointed. As for weapons, there was no Superman sword in this world. He did not use any weapons. He flew directly into the air and looked down at Diana. He knew that his opponent was good at defense. This meant that she wanted him to attack first. He did not hold back. His legs suddenly stopped in the air and angled down at a 45-degree angle. He maximized his speed advantage and rushed toward Diana as fast as lightning. Diana did not use her sword and shield directly. After talking with Hercules for a few days, her martial arts had improved greatly. According to Thea's original words, she already had the intention of gaining the upper hand after making the first move. At this time, seeing Superman rushing at her, she was extremely calm. She quickly judged the opponent's several attack points. When the two were about to come into contact, she sidestepped to avoid the first wave of impact. Chapter 462. Then, without waiting for Superman to stop, Diana stretched out her hands and grabbed Superman's red cloak. Using all her strength, her feet, knees, waist, and arms, she spun a few times on the ground at high speed. Then, she suddenly released her hands and smashed Superman onto a rock. Boom! With a loud bang, more than half of the mountain that was hit collapsed. Rocks flew everywhere, and a strong vibration was transmitted to the ground. Thea and Louise, who were miles away, could feel the obvious vibration. "Will Clark be okay?" Louise asked nervously. Thea had supervision and was very engrossed in watching. Only then did she realize that Louise couldn't see anything even though she was craning her neck. She used magic to control the ground under her feet to fly into the air and cast a long-distance vision spell on Louise. After thinking about it, she still had to ensure Louise's safety when the two of them fought until the sky fell and the earth cracked. Louise was watching a battle of this level as an ordinary person. If it were someone else with fewer tricks up her sleeve, they wouldn't be able to protect her. Thea used her light ring to conjure a small house. The two of them sat in the house and watched the fight outside. Thea was very proud of her conjuration. Even Superman's full-force attack couldn't break it. It was more than enough to resist the aftermath of their battle. This level of wrestling couldn't even be considered a warm-up. Only Louise showed a panicked expression, but when she saw Thea's calm face, her nervousness gradually subsided. Superman didn't stay in the mountain for long. He smashed the surrounding rocks with a punch, flew up, and fired a heat ray at Diana from afar. The two of them were miles apart, and the heat ray wasn't fast enough to catch them off guard. Diana took 2 steps to the side. The heat ray hit the ground and vaporized the hard black earth instantly. However, Superman didn't stop the energy output of the heat ray. He shook his head slightly and swept to the side. Diana immediately realized that she had miscalculated. The extent of the opponent's head swing was much smaller than her dodging movement. She pushed off with both feet, switched the shield to her left hand, and charged forward while enduring the heat ray. She tried to close the distance between them. The heat ray hit the shield and made a sizzling sound. Although this was a high-energy ray converted from the solar energy in Superman's body, it was still a little weak in front of Diana's divine shield. Diana didn't just blindly fight back. She made some feints from time to time while running. She switched back and forth between straight and diagonal lines and tilted her shield. She tried to attract Superman's attention with some small tricks. Realizing that Diana wanted to engage in close combat, this was exactly what Superman wanted. He stopped shooting heat rays and grabbed a mountain rock that weighed several tons with both hands and threw it at Diana. Such a large rock, even if one ignored the force it carried, the huge kinetic energy it carried was extremely powerful. The rock was huge and fast, sealing off Diana's left and right paths for her to dodge. Retreat? Diana's unyielding character made her never consider retreating, especially in battle. Even if she knew that it was not good for her, she still chose to face it head-on. She stomped hard on the ground and leaped into the air like a sharp arrow. The boulder hit the ground, and the powerful kinetic energy produced a magnificent shock wave. The planet that was originally full of ditches was smashed into a large crater. However, no one cared about the planet. Superman firmly seized the opportunity and increased his speed to the peak. He approached Diana in the roar of the sonic boom. Diana's weakness of not being used to aerial combat made her a little slow. She could only raise her shield to block Superman's thunderous blow. The invisible wave centered on the two of them spread from midair in all directions. The center of the two of them was still a long distance from the ground, but the aftermath of the shock still made an irregular round crater on the ground. Thea saw this scene and nodded secretly. Not to mention Diana's background, Superman's strength did not exceed her expectations by much. If her future enemies were at this level, although she might not be able to defeat them, it would not be too dangerous. However, Milady also remembered that Superman and Luthor in the original space-time had said that he had never used his full strength in a battle. Many years of living on Earth, rational, moral, legal, and all kinds of messy things made him spontaneously shackle himself. It was difficult to judge where his true strength lay. Diana's situation was similar to Superman's. The Guardian Silver Bracelet provided her with a strong defense, but at the same time, it also restrained her own strength. Diana's real strength would increase by 100 times when the Guardian Silver Bracelet was unsealed. According to Thea's estimation, Diana would be able to kill gods like a child at that time. It could be said that they were two warriors fighting with shackles. Superman's was an artificial morality, and Diana's was a fear of her own life and the divine power of gods. Both sides did not want to cross their own bottom line. Although the battle was fierce, it was not fatal, which was why Thea did not object. "I am an Amazon warrior, I am the daughter of Zeus and Hippolyte," Diana shouted loudly, gradually falling into a disadvantageous position under Superman's fierce attack. She began to artificially raise her momentum. "I am someone's grandson, someone's son." This was a very classical way of fighting. Many legendary heroes had this habit in battle. If the enemy was also a person who respected tradition, then he had to remember the other party's family tree at this time. When he defeated the opponent, he could very pretentiously trample on the enemy while saying, "Someone's grandson, someone's son, someone was defeated by me." To some extent, this was a classical literary version of the family tree. Superman could read all the medical books on Earth in 5 minutes. He was not a muscle warrior, and his level of knowledge was very high. He did know this habit, but it was a little embarrassing for him, an alien, to say the name of his own father and grandfather in battle. Her taciturn response had weakened his stormy attacks by a little. Diana seized the opportunity, threw away her shield, and attacked Superman with the Vulcan sword in one hand. Without the early advantage, Superman's combat intuition was still terrifyingly high. However, combat intuition could not always be there. There was a lot of randomness in it, and it was not as reliable as real martial arts. After receiving Diana's punch head-on, Superman did not notice the other party's feint, and was hit on the shoulder by the sword, leaving a shallow blood groove. The two sides paused tacitly. Without kryptonite, and without falling into a weakened state, this was the first time Superman was injured in battle. This also made him realize that the body of steel was just an adjective. Nothing was absolute, and nothing was unbreakable. "Amazing, you are a powerful warrior." Superman's energy circulated slightly, and the wound healed instantly. Only the torn clothes still reminded him that there was a wound here before. "Come on." Diana saw that he was fine, and there was no fear in her heart, only excitement. Finally, there was a guy who was not afraid of her attack. Superman had the same idea as her, and the dignified look in his eyes was a little more. Chapter 463. Bang! The two switched positions in the air, and Diana once again saw an opening. The silver bracelet was imbued with immense power, and she punched Superman in the stomach. Even though he had a body of steel, this punch was enough to make Brother Superman bleed. Thea glanced at Louise without batting an eyelid. She didn't know if this punch would affect their happy life in the future. Superman realized that he was at a disadvantage when it came to fighting moves, and he instantly changed the rhythm of his attacks. He began to use his powerful physique, and instead of pursuing any moves, he used pure strength to drive his speed. His fists rained down on Diana like raindrops. As he became more serious, the frequency of his punches increased, and the yellow sun's energy absorbed in his body naturally overflowed. On this dim planet, it looked like a sun that was gradually heating up and glowing. It was getting brighter and brighter, as if a wheel of fire had risen from the horizon. Diana also refused to show weakness. She threw away the fire god's sword, and her silver bracelet of protection sensed her fighting spirit. Although it was not unsealed, a steady stream of divine power began to fill her body. She did not have the scorching heat of the sun, only the belief of protection. Streaks of silver light appeared on the surface of her body and hid in her body, and she attacked Superman. One of them shone brightly, and each of his punches carried great power. The other was like a bright moon in the sky, unparalleled in defense, and could also mix in a fatal counterattack. After fighting in the air for less than a minute, they landed on the ground. Aerial combat was not suitable for this kind of attack. Every time Superman threw a few punches, Diana only needed to fly back a few centimeters to make Superman's attacks useless. Similarly, Diana's attacks were the same, and it really went against the original intention of sparring. Entering the ground battle, Diana's martial arts skills were finally displayed to the extreme. Each of her attacks carried a burst of cold light, bright and hazy. In a short period of time, Superman took 2 punches and 1 kick. What a pity! Thea sighed. What's a pity? Even though Thea had cast Farsight on Louise, she was still dazzled. As an amateur, she really couldn't see anything. Thea blurted out that it was a pity. She only thought that it was unwise for Diana to give up the divine sword to compete with Superman. However, she also knew that it was reasonable to give up the divine sword after giving up the shield. For Diana, it was better to be empty-handed than to play with a one-handed sword. In the future, the fire deity would forge 2 one-handed swords for her. Perhaps dual-wielding was her future path? Thea, can you do this as well? You're a deity too? Louise asked with lingering fear as she watched the 2 of them dig trenches in the ground and open holes in the mountain from time to time. The eldest young mistress laughed. This question was too unprofessional. What should she say? Bragging that she was a demigod would be too much of a show-off, and there was no need for that. I'm just an ordinary earthling. I can't compare to them, ha! Louise rolled her eyes at a place where she couldn't see. Normal people? Who are you kidding? I'm an ordinary earthling, okay? Especially when Superman and the others were fighting farther and farther away. Thea could only control the materialization under her feet to catch up with them. This further confirmed Louise's thoughts. She was the only ordinary person among the 4 of them. As the energy used by the 2 of them increased, the destruction of the planet began to show. Superman had already scanned the area with his supervision early in the battle. This planet did not even have many microbes, let alone intelligent life. He had no qualms about destroying it. Diana was even more so. As long as she was not an earthling, the life and death of extraterrestrials had nothing to do with her. Even if the planet was destroyed, the few of them could go back. They had no qualms about fighting. Diana exerted force with both hands, lifting up an entire piece of the ground and throwing it at Superman. Such a crude way of fighting suited Superman's intentions perfectly. He raised his right fist and jumped up, punching through the flying object. At the same time, not to be outdone, he looked left and right. Suddenly, his eyes lit up. He flew to the side, exerted force with both hands, and pulled up a mountain that was dozens of meters tall and weighed hundreds of tons from the ground. When he raised it above his head and was about to throw it, he suddenly noticed something. His eyes could not help but look into the distance. Diana reacted quickly. She realized that something had happened and stopped attacking. Seeing Superman lifting a mountain like a gorilla, Thea wanted to laugh. When she saw the change in their expressions, she also noticed that something was wrong. She switched to her supervision and looked in the direction Superman was looking. After searching for 1,500 kilometers, Thea finally noticed something strange. 2 alien spaceships landed on the surface of the planet one after another. The first spaceship was equivalent to the crash of a fugitive, and the second spaceship was the pursuers if nothing unexpected happened. Little death-courting expert landed on the ground with Louise. She did not know what had happened. She looked at Superman nervously. "What's the matter?" Diana could see very far. 1,500 kilometers was also within her range. She just needed to fly high. Thea truthfully told the two girls what she had seen. Louise was even more certain that the capitalists were not telling the truth. How could an Earthling like you see 1,500 kilometers away? Superman put down the mountain regretfully. It was tiring to keep lifting it. What should I do? Or should they meddle in other people's business? Did they say anything? Can you hear them? Thea asked Superman. As the only man present, Superman listened seriously. He was a little speechless. I can hear them, but I don't understand their language. So troublesome. Thea let out a long breath. Even running to a deserted planet to watch a show could cause such a drama. This proved that Superman and Diana were very lucky to be the children of the world. If she was here alone, she could just retreat. Diana might be able to take care of the matter in front of her. Even if she was thousands of kilometers away, she might not care. Unfortunately, Superman and his wife were also in the group. These two were enthusiastic people. They were the kind of people who could not sleep if they did not take care of other people. Thea could only bite the bullet and join in. She glanced at the 30 or so people in front and behind. They were all armed with technological weapons, but she could not tell how strong they were. She could understand a few mainstream alien languages. If she really could not, she could translate through the light ring. The only thing that limited her was that her hearing was not that good. She softly chanted an incantation and released Morgan Le Fay's reality simulation. She then released a water mirror spell, projecting the movements and voices of the other people onto the mirror. It was convenient for her to translate in real time. She saw a group of people chasing after the person in front. The person in the back shouted from time to time. The person in front was tightly covered. There seemed to be lead in his clothes. It was impossible to tell who he was. Thea listened for a while and smiled bitterly. She could not understand. She could only take out the light ring. After listening for a while, she said to them, "The person in front is the Princess of Tamarin. She's called Corian. The people behind are the soldiers sent by her sister to kill her." Chapter 464. The vendetta within the royal family, the antagonism between family members, and the influence of Earth's movies and TV series made it easy for them to analyze some of the inside stories here. Everyone could see the intentions in each other's eyes. Save them. Superman was worried about leaving Louise in this desolate place. However, neither he nor Diana had the ability to take his girlfriend and fly at high speed while protecting her safety. The big burden was handed over to Thea again. Who asked her to have so many tricks up her sleeve? She conjured a plane and carried her straight into the distance. 1,500 kilometers passed in the blink of an eye for them. They arrived at the scene of the battle almost at the same time. They saw Princess Corleone, known as Spark, turning back to attack the enemy from time to time. Her palms would shoot out some kind of green energy shockwave, but she seemed to be injured. Her steps were messy, and it was difficult for her to aim. She was being pushed back by the enemy and was about to be defeated. The four idlers descended from the sky, which made them a little puzzled. Without supervision and superhearing, they thought this was a deserted planet. They didn't expect to meet intelligent life forms. Thea and Louise sat in the plane. It was yellow, and they couldn't see what it was. Superman and Diana's attire was very conspicuous, especially when Diana was holding a shield and a sword. It automatically made the enemy think of some backward civilization. The leaders looked at each other and sneered. In their hearts, these guys who had descended from the sky were most likely the natives of this planet. They were the kind of primitive people who only had strength but didn't know what technology was. Princess Spark, who was not far away, had the same thought. She hurriedly shouted for the four to run. Although they didn't speak the same language, Superman could still judge from the other party's behavior that the one in front who told them to run was a good person, and the group behind who raised their technological weapons were bad guys. There was nothing to say. Fight. He was already a little angry when a good battle was interrupted. There was no need for him to tolerate this group of ignorant people. However, he still had a sense of propriety. He didn't even use 30% of his true strength. Diana was also unhappy with the way the pursuers looked at her. She also rushed forward unhappily. By the time Thea wanted to help, she discovered that the enemies were already lying on the ground. The two of them played around and defeated all the pursuers. Amidst the wailing sounds, the only one left standing was Princess Starfire. Princess Spark took off her helmet, revealing a head of red hair and orange skin. If one ignored her skin color, this woman could be considered a great beauty according to Earth's aesthetic standards. Thea translated a few sentences, but she soon realized that the princess was too talkative. She was a little annoyed by her repeated questions. Why don't you just learn it yourselves? Using the language function of the light ring, he projected the vocabulary of Tamarin's language in the form of a 3D projection in the air for the two top students to learn on the spot. Superman and Diana looked at each other and seemed to find this very interesting. At the same time, they started to remember. It turned out that Superman's father was far-sighted. The all-rounder Kryptonian's ability was simply unparalleled. Even the scholar-type Kryptonians couldn't learn as fast as him. Tamarin's language, which was much more difficult than Earth's language, was mastered by Superman in less than 30 seconds. Diana relied on Athena's wisdom as a blessing. It didn't mean that she was Athena. Although she was also learning with all her might, she was still slower than Superman by more than 2 minutes. Although he was a little slower, mastering an alien language in 2 minutes still surprised Louise. She felt that the gap between her and Clark was a little too big. Don't tell me you learn things very quickly too? While Superman and Diana went to ask Starfire, she whispered to Thea. Thea was now approachable and seemed to be full of hope. She was a completely different person from the cold and arrogant person she was when she was being interviewed. To be honest, Louise felt that it was easy to deal with her now. Vaguely understanding what she meant, Thea chuckled. I don't have such a strong learning ability. It took me 5 years to go from college to a doctorate. Louise nodded to herself. Although going from college to a doctorate in 5 years was quite an exaggeration, it was still within her acceptable range. Superman didn't finish off the enemies on the ground. Starfire was also a typical righteous person who didn't want to kill her own people. After Superman invited her to stay on Earth temporarily, she thought about it and agreed. With the battle interrupted, the few of them lost interest. Thea directly teleported back home and helped Princess Starfire find a place to stay. Only then did they say goodbye to each other. Is there something you need? Diana asked softly after everyone left. There is something. A guy who I'm not sure if he's a friend or an enemy left me a message. I have to go and help him, Thea said with a gloomy expression. Knowing that she didn't want to go into detail, Diana didn't press her. The two kissed and said, "Come back soon." Thea nodded, put on the yellow light ring, and flew out of the atmosphere. When she came to an uninhabited planet, she opened the communication channel of the yellow light ring. A 3D projection that was as tall as a human appeared. It was Sinisto. After a uniform input of energy, the projection began to speak. Thea Quinn, when you see this video, I will no longer be in this world. Although working with you isn't pleasant, it won't be annoying. The projection paused for a moment. It seemed that the original owner's emotions were fluctuating while recording this message. I don't know who will do this to me. Is it the Guardians, Hal Jordan, or someone from the Yellow Light Corps? Everything is unknown. I've experienced glory and was once the center of attention. I was the kind of hero that the Green Lights thought of. Now, I'm considered a traitor, a tyrant. These are all trivial matters. I only know that I have to protect my home planet, Kaluga. That's a responsibility that's higher than my life, higher than anything else. The Yellow Lantern Corps is shrouded in fear. When I'm not in this world, their existence will destroy my home planet. Help me take care of Kruga. From today onwards, the Yellow Lantern Corps will be yours. Archilo and Lisa Dracker will pledge their loyalty to you. They are elites who can control fear. You have to be careful of Mungo's son. He is a man with great ambition but little talent. My departure will definitely give him an opportunity to take advantage of. I've never been wrong about people. I know you'll help me. After the video ended, Xia snorted in displeasure. Xianxia was asking for help, yet he had put himself on such a high pedestal. He didn't even say a word of thanks from beginning to end. However, he did know Thea very well. She really wouldn't reject such a request that was almost like a dying wish. Strange, if he's no longer in this world, why didn't that part of the yellow light ring return to me? Did it blow up directly, or did someone tamper with it? Her first suspect was the little blue guardians who had lived for hundreds of millions of years. These guys had unfathomable strength. It was hard to say if they were controlling something behind the scenes. Chapter 465. The planet controlled by Jared was not far from Corriga. Thea ordered the official members of the Light Ring, the Dead Man, and Fiora to meet up with her there. She tried to find Xianxia's last traces based on the faint connection she had with the lamp ring. This was the wreckage of a planet. Countless cosmic dust was floating here, and from time to time, there were boulders that could not bear the weight and broke into pieces under the influence of gravity. Thea followed the guidance of the light ring and gradually approached this area. There were still many traces of battle here, and emotional energy was still filling this place. On one side was the green light of courage, and on the other side was the yellow light of fear. The green light was not unfamiliar to her. It was the one that she had worn for a short time, the one that Hal Jordan had inherited from Abin Su. The yellow light was even more familiar. It came from the same source as her light ring. It was Xianxia. She looked into the distance and did not see any corpse. When she was about to explore deeper, a figure suddenly flashed not far from her side. The white-haired, blue-skinned guardian wearing a red suit and a white robe was looking at her thoughtfully. Only one? Thea looked around blatantly and found that there was only one guardian in front of her. She put away the teleportation gem in her hand. She nodded slightly and said, "Respected guardian, what alarmed you and made you leave the main planet of Oya that you have guarded for hundreds of millions of years?" "Hello, Earthling, we meet again. You can call me Gantz." The little blue guardian said expressionlessly. "It's him?" Gantz could be said to be the only guardian who still had feelings. Maybe it was because he was kind by nature, or maybe it was because the ring of the first lantern warrior Horong was sealed in his body, so his feelings were not completely erased. This guy could be said to be the only guardian left who could be dealt with. Thea followed his advice and said, "Lord Gantz, is there anything I can help you with?" She could not see the depths of their strength on Oua that day. Now that she was a demigod, she finally had some understanding of the strength of these guys. Strong. Really strong. She just used an imperceptible spirit power to sweep the edge of his body, and it was easily bounced off by an indescribable force. The guardian named Ganser looked at her blankly as if he didn't know. Thea gritted her teeth. No one she knew was as strong as him. Although in the original space-time, Gon boasted that Spectre was not as good as him and was pressed to the ground by Spectre 3 minutes later, his level was indeed higher than the current Thea. Thea felt that she had to at least become a new god or fuse with the Parallax monster to be able to compete with him. Gonsei didn't mind her little tricks. Perhaps it was because of the billions of years that they had spent together, but there were too many people who wanted to test them. They were all immune to it. Do you think Xianxia did the right thing? He used his own order, his own understanding, to plunge the planet into a vortex of fear. Hal Jordan disagreed with his actions, and the two fought. You and Hal are both from Earth. What is your point of view? Thea really didn't think about this question. Half an hour ago, Kaluja's explosion had nothing to do with her. She was as busy as a spinning top every day. How could she have the time to think about it blindly? After thinking about it seriously, she had to admit that the various philosophical works on Earth were very rich. Predecessors had already come to a conclusion on this matter. She just had to modify it slightly and add in some of her own understanding to become a new theory. Xianxia used his own power to establish the order of the planet. He enforced the law and judged the people on the planet. He required everyone on the planet to live according to his plan. From birth to death, he arranged everything neatly. Earth has a special term for this kind of thing. It's called a utopia. It means a utopia, A utopia that can't be done. No one on Earth does this. Without the intervention of supernatural forces, the ancient sages only tried this utopia in some small colonies. Reality told them that it doesn't work at all. Ganda was just listening in a daze. Now that she had caught his attention, the powerful guardian couldn't help but ask, why? Freedom. People don't have freedom or the right to choose. They lose their life goals, expectations, and hope. Everyone falls into numbness and trifles, wasting their time doing nothing. Hope. Ganda muttered to himself. Thea's words were getting smoother and smoother. She didn't care if he was listening or not. She continued, the ancient sages of Earth gave up the utopian idea. We are walking on a free and unrestrained path. Let me give you a negative example. Krypton. You know about Krypton, right? Ganda nodded. He knew about such a famous planet. He also had a premonition of what Thea was going to say next. Krypton has the best genetic modification technology in the universe. They screen the babies at the embryonic stage and use a huge algorithm to calculate the future direction of the child. Before they are born, they have already determined their future direction. Every Kryptonian understands their mission when they can remember. Like a machine, they do their own things in a cycle. Their planet was eventually destroyed. Only one Kryptonian who gave birth naturally escaped. His parents gave him the right to choose. The glory of humanity is now sprinkled on Earth. This is the birth of a great soul. Ganda seemed to be thinking about the truth behind her words. Hope, is it? Hope can change life. Only hope can save them? He muttered to himself. Slowly, he seemed to understand some truth. There was a hint of emotion on his emotionless face. He stepped back emotionlessly and threw a residue wrapped in energy to Thea before disappearing. This is the remaining part of Sinisto's ring. I have collected it. You should be able to use its power. Sinisto was only banished to the anti-material world. Don't worry. According to the records of the Book of Ura, his story has not ended. Take care, Earthlings with ideas. We will meet again. It was not until this person disappeared without a trace that Sia looked at the ball of energy. She was not worried about Sinisto. This old man first served the Green Lantern, then the Yellow Lantern, then the Green Lantern, and then the Yellow Lantern again. In the records of the Green Lantern history, he seemed to have returned to the Green Lantern for retirement. Sinisto's life had been changing between Green Lantern, Yellow Lantern, and White Lantern for a short period of time. It could be said that his story had just begun. It was not an exaggeration to describe him as having 3 ups and downs. Ganda kept talking about hope. Was this a sign that he was going to establish a Blue Lantern? Thea shrank her neck. In all honesty, she was just talking nonsense. There was no special purpose. Chapter 466. The Guardians who had lived for hundreds of millions of years did not understand the thoughts of intelligent life and forcibly used their way of thinking to interpret the world. It could be said that 70% of the major events in the universe were created by these little blue people according to their own ideas. Day did not understand the darkness of night. Different levels of life had different ideas and heights. Thea did not know what she said that resonated with Ganda so much. The timeline of this world was already very messy, and now with her messing things up, she did not know what would happen in the future. She would deal with the future in the future. She urgently needed to deal with the remnant of the lamp ring in her hand. She found a cave on a nearby planet and began to examine it carefully. The more she looked, the more distressed she felt. Hal Jordan and Sinisto were both idiots. The energy impact of their love and hate had actually caused the lamp ring to explode. Thea let go of her lamp ring and began to use fear to communicate with the energy in the remnant. Now, her control over her mental strength had long surpassed that of these lanterns. They were all one-off businesses. Everyone's mental strength was what they were born with. Without training, it was as much as it should be. It would almost never grow after the day they were born. They themselves lacked mental power and relied on the so-called willpower to control emotions. Those with strong willpower like Hal Jordan could finish his apprenticeship in 3 days and beat his master to the anti-material world in 5 days. Other professions had a step-by-step process that was easy to learn but difficult to master. Lanterns did not need to accumulate experience at all. In fact, There was not much difference between a lifetime of work and 3 days of work. The difference was obvious at a glance. This was because they did not have the help of mental power and could only rely on their own willpower to withstand the emotional impact. Thea now felt that these little blue guardians were pretending. With just a little contact, Thea could tell that Ganda had cultivated mental power or some kind of higher internal power. They knew that mental power had a promoting effect on the lanterns, but they pretended not to know and watched the lanterns use their own will to break in with the world's will. The result was self-evident. Nisto, Hal Jordan, and the other strong-willed men were driven to the brink of death by them. It was evident that they had killed them. However, it was understandable that Thea would also hold back when she did things, but she would not go overboard. It was not a matter of holding back, but at the very least, they would hold back 7 or 8 times. The communication between the ring and residue was not smooth. The two rings had been separated for too long, and residue did not agree with Thea very much. Now it had to add an update. Unfortunately, Thea was not a regular lantern. She was not an ordinary person who could not do anything after taking off her ring. He directly incited the fire magic to smelt the remaining wills. If he was happy, they could obey him. If he was unhappy, they had to obey him. She might not be able to deal with Ganselli, but if Thea couldn't deal with this ring, then she would have wasted so many years of effort. She had even mixed a trace of power of will into it. The remnants of the lamp ring could no longer withstand it, and yellow particles kept flying into her lamp ring. The originally pale yellow lamp ring was gradually darkening. The weak resistance was suppressed by force, and the strong resistance was transformed by power of will. The speed of fusion was gradually increasing. Thea tried to imprint her spiritual imprint into the ring during the fusion period. The ring almost did not resist, and it acquiesced to her ownership. With this imprint, her control over the ring had deepened a bit. Even if Sinisto jumped out now and shouted himself hoarse, the ring would not listen to him. If you want the yellow ring, you have to remake it yourself. After 4 hours of hard work, all the residue was absorbed, and the color depth exceeded Sinisto's that day. The ring exuded a golden sun-like light, and Thea immediately closed her eyes to feel it. Materialization, protective shield, high-speed flight, wormhole, these basic functions were all there. Her original ring's functions of phase shift, space warp, teleportation, and Kryptonian recharge were all retained. Instilling fear, which originally occupied half of the abilities of both of them, was also completed. However, she could already use this ability with magic, so it was not very meaningful to her now. Energy twin, environment playback, invisibility, light refraction, cell regeneration, energy absorption, and other functions were all retained. The energy twin function was not explained clearly, so she tried it on the spot. The lamp ring would release an energy clone the size of a person at a designated location. When the energy clone was in existence, the body would remain still, while the energy clone could move at extremely high speed. After the emotional support was removed, the clone would return to the body, and all the knowledge it had learned would be transferred to the ring bearer. It seems to be a learning ability? Thea did not see how useful this clone was to her. It could not speak and it was yellow all over. Anyone could tell that it was a fake person. The only advantage was that it could go to many dangerous places. The body stood outside, and the clone ignored all the traps and moved at high speed to start memorizing. After that, regardless of life or death, it would bring the knowledge to the body. It could be said that when the two rings were reunited, many of the functions that she had envied were now useless. Thea was not very used to wearing it every time she used it. She could cast spells at will, and it was much more convenient and faster than the lamp ring. Sigh, I'm already so strong. Thinking back to the original experience, the lamp ring was like a step to the sky for ordinary people, but for her, it was just icing on the cake. The emotion amplification function of the lamp ring was still affected by the broken ring. Thea's original ring could amplify emotions by 150 times. Now that the two rings were reunited, the amplification did not exceed 240 times, which was 30% less than she expected. Calculating the time, most of the dead people had already arrived. Thea did not waste any time and tried the wormhole of the new ring. It was faster and more stable, and the speed of flying at full speed could exceed the speed of light. The first yellow ring in the world was indeed worthy of its reputation. This kind of power and speed was really intoxicating. Thea could not fly so fast by herself, and she was only the first yellow ring. Just like lantern number 1, regardless of whether it was the rainbow lantern or not, he directly obtained the first lantern ring in the universe that gathered all the primitive emotions in the universe. His power was instantly raised to the peak of the true God, and he could easily change history and reality. It could be seen that the impact of emotional energy on one's will was simply crushing. Thea did not want to be a slave to emotions, but she did not give up eating for fear of choking. The lamp ring was just a tool to her. If it was not for the fact that she automatically changed into the tights every time she wore it, she might have been able to use it a few more times. Now it was dispensable. When she arrived at Gruder's planet, the 3 official members of the Yellow Lantern Corps, Deadman, Fiora, and Gruder, were waiting for her. Sia briefly explained the situation. Taking into account that Sinisto had recruited a large number of soldiers in order to fight against the Green Lanterns of the 3,600 sectors in the later stages of the war, the current Yellow Lantern Corps of Korriga had at least 1,000 people. More than 1,000 temporary workers who had not been confirmed by the Book of Parallax. Chapter 467. 1 man against 1,000 men sounded very majestic, and the visual impact was very strong. However, it was best not to use it if the difference in strength was not as great as the difference between heaven and earth. There were countless strong people in history, such as Darkseid and Thanos. They were all arrogant and brave, but they were all pushed down by the righteous side and rubbed against the ground. Although Thea did not think much of the Yellow Lantern soldiers, she might not be able to win against hundreds and thousands of them. Unity is strength. This was applicable in 99% of situations. It was unrealistic to attack by force. Kruga's civilization level was not low. Even if it was not comparable to Krypton, which was a level 8 civilization, it was at least level 6. Unlike Earth, where aliens could come and go as they pleased, it was like a market. Kruga had a defense system. Although there was a large population on Kruga, their civilization level was only slightly higher than the natives. Space warships were out of the question. Fiora had gathered some neutral mercenaries in the universe and had a few warships, but the character of the mercenaries was hard to predict. They could be used in a favorable battle, but with such a large number of enemies, it was possible that they would defect to the enemy directly. The enemy had more people, and their defense system was intact. They had fewer people and they had to attack. There was only one choice in front of Sia, and that was to organize a small team to carry out a surprise attack, as had been done countless times in movies. She instructed Fiora to get the few people on Earth. They could not fight in space, but their fighting ability on the ground was off the charts. She began to contact Sinisto's supporters in Kruga. The more guides there were, the better. The first person she contacted was Lisa Draka, who claimed to have a certain precognitive ability. Unfortunately, she could not get through. She also knew Akiro, who was mentioned by Sinisto. He was a tall and burly blue-skinned alien. He was the training officer of the Yellow Lantern Corps. Akiro had once gone to Earth alone to gain Thea's approval. He was loyal and honest. Although he was a barbaric guy, Thea had a good impression of him. Unfortunately, she could not contact this guy either. Needless to say, it must be because of Sinisto's disappearance. His ambitious subordinates had defeated his loyal subordinates. She could not contact the members of the Light Ring. Fortunately, she had other means to contact others. Asona, can you hear me? Telescopic vision, supervision, imaging technique, and the light refraction and projection function of the Light Ring. Spells, abilities, and the 3 abilities of the Light Ring were integrated together and began to communicate across light years. Who? The purple alien woman on the other side of the camera was a bit surprised. She stared at the water curtain that suddenly appeared in front of her and asked tentatively, "Thank God you're still alive. I'm Thea, remember? I'm Sinisto's." Thea thought for a long time. Was she related to Sinisto? It was almost unrelated. "I'm Sinisto's colleague. We've met once before." Thea could not think of anything good to say, so she could only give a vague answer. The purple alien woman nodded calmly. I have a deep impression of you. Sinisto complained many times that you took away his supreme power. Thea almost vomited blood. She knew that Sinisto had said something bad about her behind her back. Although this woman was not a member of the Light Ring, she was the highest commander of the Korriga Defense Force. At the same time, she was also Sinisto's lover after his wife died. The two must have talked about her after they did something indescribable. That was why this woman had a deep impression of her. Having an impression was better than not having one. How's the situation in Korriga? Sinisto left me a message. Is there anything I can help you with? The purple woman, Asona, said stiffly. Korriga does not need another dictator. Sinisto betrayed his people and betrayed me. Korriga does not need any lanterns, green or yellow. We don't need any. After that, she threw something that looked like a weapon at the water curtain. However, it was useless. Thea's water curtain was invisible. If she did not cancel it, no one could do anything about it. After throwing things for a long time, Asona threw a tantrum and looked at the water curtain with a serious face. What do you want? I want to fulfill a promise. Or rather, help Sinisto get rid of his Yellow Lantern Corps and liberate Korriga. And after that? After that? Thea thought for a while. The unqualified Light Ring members will be stripped of their rings and sent back to where they came from. I'll take the rest with me. In the future, Earth would be the center of the universe. Other than Sinisto, no one would care about a planet like Korriga. This answer was out of Asona's expectations. She was a very decisive woman. What do you need me to do? Help me find a secret room. I want to take the team directly to Korriga. As the person in charge of the planet's military force, Asona immediately thought of a few words. She did not know that Thea did not have enough manpower. She only thought that the other party was not going to launch a large-scale attack. This was very much in line with her intentions. But Asona agreed without hesitation. Before ending the call, Thea told her, collect information about the Corps. See you later. After that, she began to set up a long-distance teleportation circle. The Light Ring's foundation had increased greatly, so there was no need to abandon it. At the same time, she was also worried that Asona would do something bad to them. The teleportation circle was reinforced with magic and emotional energy at the same time. It could last for a long time and the channel was stable. Without a specific method, even a nuclear bomb could not destroy it. The few people from Earth quickly arrived. The somewhat awkward electric lady still put on her imitation light ring. The suggestion spell was constantly affecting her. Death Knell and Poison Ivy were fine, but this was the first time Father Midnight had come to an alien planet. Especially when he saw many primitive natives carrying the chubby Gruder to meet up with them, he was even more surprised. Is this guy also my companion? Fiora stood alone beside Thea and watched her make the teleportation circle. Death Knell and Father Midnight came from a mixed background, so they had more in common. After that, Gruder joined their conversation. On the other side, Death Knell was bragging with Poison Ivy and Electric Lady. They also brought some people with them. There were alien subordinates recruited by Fiora and native warriors controlled by Gruder. Death Knell also brought more than 100 elite soldiers and his daughter, Rose Wilson, who was also a powerful warrior. Another thing that caught Thea's attention was that Death Knell had recruited a psychic. She was an earth lady who could control soil and rocks. However, she was too young to be used as the main force. As for her subordinates, she did not think too much. Those who could catch her eye were all powerful people. It was normal for them to want to develop their forces. Just like what she said to Ganda, there was only motivation when there was hope. Chapter 468. Each of them had about 500 subordinates. In order to allow some of the bigger guys, such as Grud, to pass through, Sia had increased the height and width of both sides by a lot. From afar, it looked like a miniature version of the Dark Portal. This portal was also an experiment for herself. She gathered emotional energy into her magic power, and the materialized materials were connected with magic power. At the intersection of magic power, the portal would appear for protection. Traditionally, the materialization of a lantern would dissipate immediately without emotional energy. Thea first inputted some of her emotions and then wrapped the portal with magic power. Even without her support, the portal could still last for half a day. Everyone, let's go. Don't move the natives. Kill anyone wearing a yellow coat who attacks us. Thea carefully checked the coordinates and then turned back to order. According to the plan, the dead would go first. Even if Athona changed, he would be able to possess her and control her. Then, it would be Fiora and her subordinates. The shrewd female adjutant was capable of fighting and carrying and could deal with any situation. Then, it would be the warriors from Earth and Grud. Thea looked at the last to make sure there were no mistakes. Then, she stepped into the portal. On the other side, the battle scene did not appear. It seemed that Athona was a very trustworthy person. Thea walked out of the crowd. Although she did not like the clothes, she was here to take over the army today. She still changed into the somewhat shameful tight combat suit. What's the situation now? Thea asked Athona, who was also fully armed. The defense of this planet was too comprehensive. The interference of metal and various electromagnetic interference were affecting her supervision. She wanted to find the central power source of the yellow lights, but she could not find it even after looking for a long time. This close friend of Sinisto looked at Thea's yellow combat suit. Her pupils shrank a little, but she quickly got rid of the unnecessary emotions and said loudly, "Come to our headquarters. Those yellow lantern villains are destroying our city everywhere." With Death, Nell, and Fiora, two experienced veterans, Sia arrived at the frontline command of the Korriga Resistance Army. It could be seen that Sinisto was not unprepared for the possibility of a rebellion. He had equipped some of his compatriots with weapons that could counter the hard light of the lantern rings. However, Korriga had been peaceful for too long, and many of the yellow lanterns were notorious bandits. The rebellion army lost 15 cities in an extremely short period of time, and a large number of elites died in the first wave. If Thea had not intervened in time, it would have only been a matter of time before they were exterminated and enslaved. Do you know what a central energy source is? Thea was worried that she might not be able to express herself clearly, so she showed her a portable lamp with a charging ring in her water mirror. It's something 100 times bigger than this. Have you seen it before? Do you know where it is? Asona had indeed seen it before. After all, it was impossible for a lantern that was several hundred meters tall and completely golden in color to go unnoticed. Sinisto might be able to hide it, but such a large item had very high requirements for a place to hide it. I've seen it before. I think it's in the depths of Sitaru City. Sinisto had hollowed out 20 kilometers underground and placed a lot of things there. Asona recalled. What are you going to do? My ring can control the central energy source. It will take back all the energy in the ring. When dealing with some unarmed alien criminals, I'm sure the resistance army will be enough to deal with them, right? If the ring loses its power, then what about you? Asona's meaning was self-evident. Thea smiled brightly. Even Asona, who was also a woman, was a little dazed. To the Sinisto army, the ring is everything. But to me and my men, it's just one of the means. We have crossed the distant sea of stars, traveled through time and space, and witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations. The power of a mere lantern ring is too insignificant for us. Asona did not understand. Thea was bragging without paying taxes. She had bragged so much that if one did not look at her, they would have thought that she was the heavenly father of the new creator planet. Asona's eyes were filled with stars. She did not believe it, but the previous conversation and teleportation made her realize that the woman in front of her had an ability that Sinisto did not have. She no longer bothered about the lantern ring and explained to them in detail what they needed to pay attention to in Sitaru City. Half an hour later, the assault team led by Thea had arrived at the outskirts of the city. There were all kinds of detection equipment in front. She did not dare to charge in with her invisibility spell. The invisibility spell of more than 500 people required a lot of magic power. Thea planned to split a portion of them into a feint attack while the rest attacked the city. Death Nell stopped her and gestured for the Earthen Girl to come forward. The Earthen Girl, who was only 8 or 9 years old, was now being dragged to an alien planet to fight. Most girls would have fainted from fear, but this girl was quite strong. When she saw Death Knell looking at her, she nervously pressed her hands on the ground. Rumble, a very dull sound was heard. She controlled the soil and kept flipping it up. The solid ground seemed to be playing a game with her. Several tons of soil and stones flew out automatically. What appeared in front of them was a deep pit that was 17 or 18 meters deep and 10 meters wide. Yo, not bad. Thea had not absorbed Gaia's divinity yet. She could only cast a few simple earth attribute spells. She could dig a hole to bury someone in her daily life. This kind of large-scale movement of the earth veins was a bit like earthquake, collapse, and silence. She could not cast it as easily as the earthen girl. If they could dig into the ground silently, it would save them a lot of trouble. Using her X-ray vision, she saw that it was not too far from Sinisto's underground base. It was less than 2,000 meters away. The little girl is not bad. This will help her recover her strength. Tell her to dig the hole diagonally below the spot I indicated. This little girl was too young and was not worth her time. She would need at least 5 or 6 years to grow up. That was too long. Thea threw Death Knell a gemstone that could recover his strength. It was better for him to give orders to his subordinates. Death Knell was very excited. As Thea had more and more talented subordinates, his importance was declining. He urgently needed to prove his worth, so he was determined to bring the 9-year-old earthen girl out. Okay. Death Knell nodded heavily at the earthen girl. Because of her ability, she was treated as an oddball in the village. If Death Knell had not saved her, she would have been burned to death by the villagers. Seeing Death Knell's signal, just like a manga character, he was filled with motivation as he desperately needed recognition. His eyes shone brightly, and his psionic ability was fully activated. Following Sia's mark, he dug deeper. The young lady did not feel guilty about hiring a child as she constantly controlled the earthen girl. 10 degrees to the left. A little more. Chapter 469. After 10 minutes of hard work, a tunnel that was 1,000 meters deep and 10 meters wide was opened. The Earthstone lady's ability consumed her mental strength and stamina. Her stamina was replenished by the technological potions, and Thea helped her activate part of her mental strength. Considering that she was still young, she did not spoil her growth and only improved her mental strength a little. After checking the bottom of the tunnel and confirming that there were no traps, Thea led the 500-strong tomb raiding team into the underground palace. No, Sinisto's Bat Cave. They did not see any traps along the way, but they encountered a lot of security devices. The disadvantage of having too many people was unavoidable. One of the mercenaries accidentally stepped on a trap, and the wall immediately rang with a rapid alarm. Forget it, let's go to the southwest. Thea could only see that the direction was blocked by her X-ray vision. The central power source must be there. On one hand, she contacted a Sona to launch a ground attack to attract some of the enemies. On the other hand, she cast a large area of effect haste on the tomb raiding team to start a race against the enemies. The team rushed for 4 or 5 minutes before they were stopped by a group of Yellow Lantern Corps at a crossroad. It could be seen that the enemy had gathered in a hurry, and there were less than 100 of them. The sludge, whose body was made of corrosive liquid, was also in the team. It was one of the few official members of the Yellow Lantern Corps that Thea had seen. It could borrow the ability of the corpse wrapped in liquid when it was alive. It was difficult to judge this guy by the human sense of good and evil because it was not even a living creature. It was even more out of the question whether it was a traitor or not. This guy probably did not even have the concept of betrayal. This area had a lot of visual interference, and Thea did not see the Yellow Lantern Corps' deadliest killer, a super virus that could only be seen through a microscope. They might have a miniature enemy. Let your plants start searching. Thea turned to Poison Ivy. Plants had different sensory systems from living creatures, and they were best at searching for enemies like microbes. Some plants could also release interferons, which were fatal to viruses. The enemy group was in chaos, and a burly alien with a yellow face and a height of 5 meters stood out. Master of the Book of Parallax, are you here to congratulate me on conquering Kaluga and becoming the leader of the Corps? The alien's orange eyes automatically looked at Thea. Who are you? Sia pretended to be confused. She recognized this burly guy at a glance. Little Mungo or Mungo II. His father, Old Mungo, had attacked Seaside City on Earth in Sia's memory. But in this space-time, Old Mungo had led the so-called army that had conquered the entire universe to attack the main planet of Ura. She didn't know if he was crazy or he didn't take medicine. Ganda could not defeat the Spectre in a one-on-one fight, but this did not mean that the Guardian Blue Men were weak. It was just that the Spectre, the vengeful spirit of God, was too strong. Furthermore, there was not just Ganda on the main planet of Ura. There were 6 other Guardian Blue Men with the same combat strength. In addition, there were 7,200 official Green Lanterns, a considerable number of reserves, and a small number of elite Supreme Green Lanterns with modified bodies. Facing such a powerful force, Mungo, who was full of confidence, crashed into it head-on. This wasn't the Green Lantern Corps that Hal Jordan had led after the Lights Out incident, and there were only a few of them. What greeted him was the Green Lantern Corps at their peak. A green sea that covered the entire planet of Ura crushed his invincible army into dust. Similarly, his body, which had been tempered thousands of times to the point of being able to attack Superman, was shattered into pieces. The result of tens of thousands of people attacking him was that his head was sent to Ura's showroom. Sinisto had taken in his son, who was now standing in front of Thea. It had to be said that his genes and physique were indeed extraordinary. When others wore one light ring, he might feel that the effect was not strong enough, but he wore 4 rings of the same attribute. A normal person would need a strong willpower to wear one ring. Just like Thea, wearing different colored rings required different emotions. It was different from this person who wore 4 rings. Sinisto and Hal Jordan were both strong-willed people. When had anyone ever seen them wear 2 rings of the same color? There was no need for this at all. The amount of emotion output per unit of time was fixed for everyone. The advantage of wearing 4 rings of the same color was probably just to maintain the firepower. When one light ring's energy was depleted, the next one would be replaced. Or one light ring could be used to attack while the other one was used to defend. At least, Thea could only think of these functions. There were some advantages, but the disadvantages were huge. The emotional consumption of the ring bearer was also doubled, so it was not universal. In Thea's opinion, Mungo II was a little neglectful. The strong body and mental strength he had inherited from his father had been used on the light ring. The original spacetime was also a traitor, and he was killed by Sinisto, who had tampered with the light ring. Thea did not have such means now, but in her opinion, it would not take too much effort to deal with this guy who had abandoned his family's secret arts and switched to playing with rings. His father could fight Superman head-on, so his body's genes should be very strong. In a while, she would have to control the intensity of her attacks. It would be best to preserve the body for reference. Mungo II did not know that his background had been exposed. Thea was going to take his body back for research. As if he was about to quarrel with someone, he shouted anxiously, "I am Mungo, the ruler of Koraga, the emperor of the universe tomorrow." Thea sneered. Her laughter was a little harsh. Mungo, whose self-esteem was severely hurt, stretched out his waxy left hand, and a hammer made of fear energy smashed towards Thea. Interesting. His opponent wasn't brainless. His attack was still worth watching. For layers. Thea glanced at it and saw that this manifestation was a little confusing. It looked very ordinary from the outside, but it was actually a set of 4 manifestations. The emotional manifestation of the temporary light ring was too weak, and Mungo could not work on quality. He could only pursue quantity. However, this was meaningless in the face of absolute power. Fiora stood beside Thea and saw the huge hammer coming towards her. Her expression did not change, and she smashed the manifestation with one hand. The 3rd, 4th, and 5th layers did not mean much to her. Her move shocked the yellow lanterns on the other side. She did not rely on any emotional energy, nor did she rely on any technological equipment. With just a casual punch, she shattered Mungo's attack, which they thought was invincible. The yellow lanterns, who were all villains, could not help but feel their momentum stagnate. Thea's side had more people than them to begin with. With this, the yellow lanterns were even more vulnerable. Leave the big guy's body intact. Kill the rest. Thea said lightly. As soon as she finished speaking, the electric lady, whose temperament had changed drastically and who had a tendency to be violent, rushed out first. This underground base had a lot of electrical equipment. She rushed directly into the midst of the enemies, and a silver-white electric current began to wreak havoc in the crowd. Chapter 470. Poison Ivy had planted a large number of plants on the battlefield while they were talking. Now, under her control, the plants broke through the ground. The yellow lanterns were used to fighting in the real world, so they were caught off guard by the plants and the electric lady. Some of them were electrocuted, some had their bodies corroded by the mucus from the acidic plants, some were swallowed whole by the man-eating plants, and some had their hands and feet entangled by the vines. There were all kinds of situations. Death Knell was not to be outdone. He dodged the yellow lights and charged in from the side. In his left hand was a titanium alloy sword, and in his right hand was an acid attribute magic sword that he had obtained from the Church of the Cold Flame. Many of the aliens looked very abstract, and he did not care what the enemies looked like. He just slashed at their necks, wrists, and ankles. His physical fitness had long surpassed the limits of the human body. Coupled with his strange footwork and proficient martial arts, many yellow lanterns were cut down by him like a whirlwind just as they realized that there was someone around them. Midnight Daddy cast 2 group spells. His magic was not as strong as Thea's, so the effect was barely satisfactory. Suddenly he saw a sludge that looked like a sludge monster trying to run away. There was a corpse hidden in its outer membrane, but Midnight didn't care. The corpse looked like an alien, and it had nothing to do with his ancestral spirits on Earth. He chanted a spell and forcefully controlled it. Not to mention, the ancestral spirit of Earth was quite powerful. It used magic to communicate with the corpse, and under the influence of its psychic ability, the corpse extended a bone claw from the body of the sludge. The sludge that was running away was severely injured, and a large amount of liquid in its body flowed out from the wound. Midnight Daddy followed up with another attack. He put his palms together and caused the corpse to explode inside the sludge. This official member that was personally recruited by Sinisto and registered by Thea exploded into a puddle of acid. Its weak cell walls could no longer sustain the loss of energy in its body. It fell to the ground and did not move anymore. Thea took out the parallax book. Following the death of the sludge as an official member, there was a record of its life in the book. Its life history slowly emerged with its death. This thing was originally born on a barren planet. In an accident, an unlucky interstellar traveler's spaceship crashed on this planet, and its corpse coincidentally fell into its body. Only then did it slowly gain self-awareness. Even with the parallax book, it was difficult to determine whether the consciousness in the sludge was the consciousness of the unlucky interstellar traveler or the remnant consciousness of the barren planet. However, its corpse was also very valuable for research. Thea first used her ring's high authority and magic power to stop Huang Ring from looking for a new ring bearer. She had no choice but to do so. If she killed one, Huang Ring would find another. That would be an endless cycle. Fortunately, there were only a few official rings, and the rest of the temporary rings did not have the ability to find new ring bearers. Thea had just wrapped up the corpse of the sludge when she saw another ring fly into the air. Who died? She looked to see if it was someone from her side, but the ring did fly out from the battlefield. There was only one truth. The member of the Ring of Lanterns that could only be seen with a microscope, the deadly virus Despolus, was dead. A virus that had evolved to such a degree of self-awareness should have a lot of research value. Unfortunately, this thing was too small. Who knew what equipment Sinisto had installed underground? Thea's supervision could not be used at all. She stared for a long time but could not find the guy's corpse. The most important question was, the sludge was killed by Midnight Daddy. Who killed this thing? It could not have been trampled to death, right? Thea used part of her magic power to control the Ring of Lanterns that was about to fly away. She looked at the records in the parallax book. It was indeed dead. Thea asked her friends, but no one knew how this thing died. Maybe it was killed by the plant's enhanced interferon? The botanist, Poison Ivy, put forward her opinion at the right time. Thea searched everywhere but to no avail. She could only agree with this theory. In fact, she was more inclined to think that this guy was knocked out by the interferon and then was trampled to death by a guy with a big foot in the battle. The two sides were fighting in full swing. She could not stop them. They all raised their feet and let her look for the cockroach. She sighed slightly. There were so many viruses in the universe. It was not easy to evolve one with self-awareness. Was it easy? It was such a pity that he died without being able to display any value. The situation on the battlefield was one-sided. The most eye-catching one was the Lightning Lady. It was hard not to notice her from the sound and light effects. Silver-white electric current was constantly being thrown out by her. She used to be a live streamer and had very few fights. She also wanted to throw some lightning bolts coolly, but her accuracy was worrying. She also had problems controlling her power. She was clearly aiming at the enemy in front of her. The enemy had also conjured a shield. She did not expect that she would swing her hand and hit the face of the enemy next to her. The Yellow Lanterns did not know that her accuracy was poor and thought that this was her fighting style. A group of people came over to besiege her. The Lightning Lady was least afraid of being besieged. Coupled with the fact that she could not control the electric current, her AoE damage could be said to be number one on the scene. Coupled with the fact that she would occasionally flash out of the encirclement and run from one group to another to release electric current, the Yellow Lanterns were beaten to a pulp. Not everyone could be like Sinisto and Thea, who could create a giant to protect their entire body. Most people could only conjure a part of their body armor. Everyone was suffering from the electric current. Unless they were a special life form, there were not many who were immune to electric shocks. I can't fight like this. Originally, when he saw that Thea did not make a move and the seemingly fierce Fiora did not join the battle, Mungo too, who considered himself the emperor of the universe, also stood still. Now, he felt that he had to make a move. Although it was a little embarrassing, he was still prepared to get rid of the Lightning Lady who was the biggest threat to his side. He took a step forward and was instantly stunned. He could only feel that something was squeezing into his body, and at the same time, it was as if a giant hammer was hammering his head. He did not know that this was the cooperation of the dead man and Groot. One was drilling into his body, while the other was forcefully controlling him. His willpower had already been worn down by the 4 lantern rings. Now that he encountered the skills of these two hooligans, he kept losing ground in his spiritual world. The control of his whole body had already been squeezed out by 1/3. It would be strange if he could still move. Seeing that the generals were fighting beautifully, the morale of the soldiers on Thea's side was greatly boosted. Death Knell's daughter was particularly eye-catching. Her fighting style was very similar to her father's. Her double swords flew up and down. Her strength, speed, and skills were not inferior to Thea's in the past. The natives brought by Groot were also quite brave. Every day, they carried this several tons of gorilla and ran around the mountain. A few of them had really trained their strength. The javelins that were as thick as an arm were thrown by them, leaving afterimages. The throwing objects of the leader of the strong men could even shatter the shield. Chapter 471. Mungo too was dragged into the spiritual world by Grudra and Deadman to play tug-of-war. Sludge and Supervirus were directly destroyed, and the remaining Yellow Lanterns died one after another. If it weren't for the constant return of the Lantern Ring members from the battlefield on the ground, they would have collapsed long ago. However, they had no coordination ability and no command system. There were too many loopholes in their fighting style. Facing Thea, who had the upper hand, they were beaten to a pulp. One after another, 2 after another, 3 after another. It seemed that they were still persevering, but the number of people who supported Mungo was rapidly decreasing. Many people had begun to think of a way out. Seeing that the situation was good, Fiora, the adjutant, as the highest combat power second only to Thea, personally came out. On the battlefield, enemies and allies were mixed, and powerful moves were not suitable to be used. This was a little restrictive for Supergirl, who could punch a hole in the ground and break a mountain with a kick, but Fiora didn't have this problem. Her combat skills were already very delicate. The Kryptonian combat skills she used back then were no longer suitable for her body that had skyrocketed. However, she still had her combat experience. If Superman was like a farmer with infinite strength, Then Fiora was like a thief with full strength. Her figure was extremely fast as she weaved in and out of the crowd. None of her attacks were a match for her. These ordinary materializations were completely defenseless against her. After killing more than 10 people in an instant, she walked to the side of the dazed Mungo too. She signaled to Dead Man and Grudra in the distance, and the two people, orangutans, withdrew the control at the same time. Mungo was dizzy and didn't understand what was going on. He saw Fiora grabbing the top of his head with one hand and his chin with the other. With a crisp crack, the giant's neck was directly broken by her. His tenacious vitality prevented him from dying immediately. His lips moved slightly as if he wanted to say something, but unfortunately, his vocal trachea was destroyed. He tried for a long time but couldn't say a word. The lantern ring on his hand was still shining, as if he wanted to do something. However, the loss of vitality also took away his willpower. His vision became more and more blurred, and he vaguely saw himself becoming the emperor of the universe. In the end, he completely died in his imagination. If it was a fair fight, Mungo too wouldn't lose to Fiora by much. However, the reality was just that helpless. The two gangsters had forcefully controlled him, and he didn't even have the chance to reveal a single bit of his strength before he was directly killed. Thea was very satisfied with the cooperation of her subordinates. They skillfully defeated the boss on the other side, and she didn't even need to do anything. This man is a warrior. He deserves a proper burial. Thea put Mungo's body away after she finished speaking. It was definitely inappropriate to talk about dissecting the enemy in front of her subordinates, so she told a little white lie. When the remaining yellow lanterns saw that their new leader was dead, they no longer had the will to fight. Some of them quickly summoned their aircraft and fled in all directions. Some of them even surrendered and waited to be taken in. Thea was not obsessed with moral cleanliness. She had a lot of bad people under her command. Regardless of whether they were good or bad, she would take them all in and screen them out later. She didn't send anyone to chase after them. As long as she took control of the central power source and took back all the energy from the light rings, these people would be in for a good show. The lucky ones might fall directly from the sky, the weak ones would fall to their deaths on the spot, and the strong ones would fall to their deaths. The unlucky ones would fly out of the planet into space, and their rings would suddenly lose power. Those who didn't have the ability to survive in space could only wait for death. As for those who ran the fastest and had the worst luck, it was possible that their rings would lose power as soon as they entered the wormhole. Thea really didn't know what kind of horrible things would happen to them. The resistance forces were scattered. Under the guidance of a few people who led the way, the large group entered the passage without any obstructions. After walking for a short distance, Thea saw the incomparably huge central power source of the yellow lanterns. It was the same shape as the usual charging lanterns, but it was 100 times bigger. How uncreative! She looked around the huge power source and was a little dissatisfied. Back then, Sinisto had spent a lot of effort to accumulate that small ball of yellow energy to such a large size. However, this shape was a little speechless. The central power source of the Green Lanterns on Ura's main planet also looked like this. However, this was mainly because the little blue people didn't have any artistic cells. After billions of years, their brains had become rigid. You, Sinisto, can't be that unimaginative, right? It was exactly the same except for the color. From this, one could see how deeply the Green Lanterns influenced Sinisto. You're here. Why is it you? Thea separated a bit of her mental power into the central power source and accidentally bumped into the creature inside. The Parallax Demon's main body was sleeping inside. He didn't expect to meet Thea, who wasn't afraid of him. Thea also didn't expect this guy to be hiding in the central power source. The Parallax Demon didn't have any good way to deal with this human who had feelings of fear but wasn't afraid of him. The Parallax Demon was afraid of the existence that she was afraid of. The Parallax Demon didn't dare to conjure the images of those powerful unknown existences to scare Thea. A very strange paradox made him feel a little helpless, and he could also see that the strength of Thea's spiritual power was much stronger than before, and there was a huge difference between her and a mortal like Sinisto. He asked casually if he wanted to possess her or if he wanted to have a strong power. You don't want either? Fine, I'll go back to sleep. You go do your thing. Thea didn't care about this kind of external fake power at all. The parallax demon also looked uninterested. After a simple routine, the parallax demon fell into a deep sleep. Retract all the energy in the light rings, Thea ordered decisively. The golden central power source received the highest order and began to roar silently. The entire planet could see yellow light gathering there. The light rings on the scene didn't differentiate between friend and foe. Except for Thea's own ring, all the energy returned to the main power source. Even in the distant outer space, accompanied by all kinds of unbelievable screams, yellow energy flew out of the light rings and gathered at Kaluga. Asona, how are you guys doing outside? We won. We won. It could be heard that the commander on the other side was so excited that he had forgotten his surname as he spoke incoherently. The rest of the battle was nothing to write home about. The tens of thousands of Kaluga resistance army fought against more than 1,000 unarmed aliens. It was a massacre. When there were only about 300 people left, Thea and Asona signed a new agreement. Both sides officially stopped fighting, and the defense of Kaluga was finally over. Asona needed to reclaim their cities. 15 cities were lost, 6 of them were in ruins. Countless lives were lost, and the loss of all kinds of resources was astronomical. Asona was busy, and so was Thea. She had to accept the current members and identify the good and the bad. Some of the rings were confiscated and sent back to their original planets. Chapter 472. She did not care if the ex-Yellow Lamp members would return home and continue to wreak havoc. Lisa Draka, Aquilo and the other loyal followers of Sinisto were also rescued by them. Aquilo immediately pledged his loyalty to Thea. Thea recognized his ability to train new recruits. This guy was vulgar and rude, focused on strength, and had a fierce face. He was an expert at training new recruits. Karu Hill, compared to Lisa Draka, who was a little neurotic, was a rare girl among the members of the Ring of Lights. After hesitating for a while, she also chose to pledge her loyalty. It was fine if she did not speak. From afar, she looked like a beautiful woman. However, when she opened her mouth was full of sharp teeth. She did not even need makeup to act in horror movies. Some beast souls lingered around her body from time to time. Even if she did not use the Ring of Lights, she could still be considered a psychic. Lisa Draka and the antimatter weapon master that Thea could not see through were left. The two of them wanted to find Sinisto. They did not have any conflict of interest with Thea. In the original time, Sinisto wanted to come back to save the people and quickly walk out of the shadow of failure. Now, he might not have such great determination. Thea did not make it difficult for them. Too many elders in the army were not conducive to her control. It was also a good thing that the two of them wanted to leave. She helped them recharge the rings and politely sent them out of Koruga. All the ownerless Ring of Lights on the battlefield were collected. There was no need for more than 3,000 Yellow Lamp members. Sinisto's initial selection criteria was to control fear. Later on, it became to create fear. Perhaps it was the pressure of the Green Lantern, or perhaps it was his own mentality that caused him to forget his original intention. He began to wantonly recruit villains and villains. The elite atmosphere of the entire army was destroyed by him. Did those who controlled fear have to be bad? Just look at Batman. Sinisto had led the entire army astray. Thousands of temporary Ring of Lights were directly thrown back into the central power source. The return of energy made the parallax demon very excited. Such a beautiful environment made it have the urge to sleep for another 500 years. After removing the impurities and preserving the essence, the sea of Ring of Lights turned back into energy. Thea cut a part of it and distributed it to her subordinates. Deadman. Both Grud and Fiora's rings had been upgraded to the so-called elite level, which was about the same as Hal Jordan's ring. Death Knell and the other Earth companions each received an official lantern ring. The one who was the best at conjuring was Midnight Daddy. He was a magic-type character with high intelligence and was very talented at conjuring things. He directly conjured a creature that looked like it was made up of various animals and looked very much like an evil god. The Poison Vine Lady and the Lightning Lady lacked imagination, and the use of the light ring was more for them to wander around. Death Knell's materialization was similar to Hal Jordan's. They were all machine guns, rockets, planes, tanks, and so on. Their original imitation lantern rings did not conflict with the official lantern rings. Perhaps it was because she and Diana had magically modified them that the lantern rings did not recognize them as their own kind. The group rested in Corriga for 3 days. Including those who did not participate in the robbery and those who were loyal to Sinisto, as well as those who were originally from the battlefield, the remaining 1,000 or so in the army were reduced to 300 by her. A large number of unrelated people were thrown out of the army by her to stay where they were. Although the number of people was reduced by nearly 70%, they were more united and registered one by one. The scene of the entire army being temporary workers was gone forever. With the close connection between each other and the energy restriction of the lantern ring being lifted, it could be said that the combat power of the new Yellow Lantern ring was not reduced by much. The reorganized Yellow Lantern Corps began to withdraw from Corriga. Corriga belonged to Sector 1417 of the Green Lantern Ring. With the death of Sinisto, the new Green Lantern Ring would soon take office. Thea was not ready to fight against the main planet of OUA, so the right thing to do was to lead the team and leave. She said goodbye to Asona. Seeing that she was very cooperative, Thea left her a communicator so that she could contact her if she had any trouble in the future. Death, Knell, and Grud's men chose to return to their original planets. Thea began to consider the new base of the Yellow Lantern Corps. It was definitely not suitable to bring them all to Earth. Many people here were wild and difficult to tame, and there was no way to control them on Earth. The only way was to make use of their strengths and gain benefits for herself. What could these people do? They were all big and burly, and there was no way they could help the old and the young. It was even more impossible for a group of people who only had muscles for brains to do some technical research. Referring to the red light and orange light conventions, it was a good idea to find an area and dominate it. There were not many places in the universe that the Guardians could not control, but at least there were a few. Thea did not go to those remote star regions. It was not in her interest. Her plan for the future of the Yellow Lantern Corps was to be mercenaries and collect protection fees. She could find neutral locations to collect protection fees and take on missions on a daily basis. She could train her troops and earn money, so why not? Of course, she had to be careful when choosing this target. For example, in a place like Apocalypse Star, where the people were simple and honest, even with the Motherbox technology, Thea did not have the guts to collect protection fees. The target she chose was a trading company called Ibn. This was the closest translation from Earth's language. In fact, Ibn was an interstellar alliance that focused on trade, not a shell company that could kill 3 managers with a brick. They were located in Sector 0571, and the information recorded in the light ring was Oasis Bay Starport, which belonged to Ibn Trading Company. "It's really big." Fiora, who had seen a lot, could not help but exclaim. "Yes, it's a good place." Thea also felt that the flying object that was slowly moving in space was too magnificent. They had modified the entire planet and used the planet's core as the power source of the spacecraft, turning the entire planet into a supersized space battleship. The central area was the original planet, about 20,000 kilometers in diameter. Countless city buildings stood on the planet's surface, and there were various kinds of aliens on the ground shuttling back and forth. As the name suggested, the port was for ships to dock. However, they did not dock ships, but spaceships of various civilizations. There were parking aprons tens of thousands of kilometers around the planet, and all kinds of weapons that Thea did not recognize were densely packed as far as the eye could see. This was the crystallization of technological weapons. It was impossible to deal with without a large-scale invasion. Fiora and the other Kryptonians had always been taking whatever they saw. Seeing that Thea was a little tempted, she asked softly, "Are you interested in this place?" Thea did not answer directly. "Let's go down and take a look first." Most aliens came in spaceships, and it was rare to see a uniform like them flying through the wormhole. The person in charge of the port was very knowledgeable. He knew about the Green Lantern Corps, but he had never seen these people in yellow before. However, he did not want to offend them, so he still welcomed them. "Welcome," friends from afar. I am the ambassador of Ibn Trading Company in Oasis Bay Starport. An alien creature that was not much bigger than a squirrel came in front of them in a spaceship. His tone was friendly, but the 2 rows of robots standing behind him did not look very friendly. Chapter 473. Of course, Thea couldn't say that they were here to collect some protection fees. Now that they saw that their spaceship was very good and impressive, they were fated to be with them. They planned to take it by force and use it as their base in the future. She pretended to be harmless and chatted with the squirrel-like ambassador for a while. She realized that they could communicate and the squirrel-like ambassador wouldn't violate the port's neutrality principle. There were tens of thousands of aliens coming and going here every day. Some had good tempers and some had bad tempers. He didn't have time to meddle in other people's business. After explaining a few things to take note of in a friendly manner, he left with his people. The guards seemed to be robots? They should be controlled by the main computer. Fiora kept communicating with Thea in the ring. Don't worry. Arrange our people, Thea. Thea threw a banana at the head of the gorilla who was looking around. Understand their organization structure. Control them from the bottom. Be careful and don't make any mistakes. Let the dead cooperate with you. Death Knell, you lead. Sia sized up Poison Vine Lady, Daddy Midnight, and Lightning Lady. These 3 people's combat power would be affected in the space environment, especially Poison Vine Lady. After leaving the plant and walking in space, she was already sweating profusely. You take Electric Lady and the Yellow Lantern Corps to develop your connections here. Poison Ivy and I will return to Earth. Midnight, I want to take a look here and continue my old profession. I opened a small bar to inquire about news from both the black and white sides. Also, I can find a lot of magic equipment here. Old Man Midnight spoke first. The corpses that had exploded in the mud were pieced together by him. This unknown voodoo sorcerer insisted that the alien corpses could respond to his psychic arts and were of great research value. Thea thought for a while. It was not impossible. Now that her subordinates had the yellow lantern rings, it would be easy for them to return to Earth. Earth's magic world had regressed by 30 years because of her. It was useless to leave Midnight on Earth. Okay, we have a lot of universal currency in our hands. We can take the money from Fiora to buy land and various facilities. No matter if it was General Zod or Sinisto, they were both rich people. Thea had ransacked their collections. Even by the standards of the universe, she was not poor. She wanted to slowly take control of the entire army. The entire process required both coercion and enticement. As long as she occupied this lucrative port and this trade alliance, loyalty and cohesion would naturally come. Investigate their main control computer. Brainiac is still a threat, so they won't develop artificial intelligence. At most, they'll use artificial intelligence. They'll create a few robot rebellions, and will help him solve the problem. After that, we'll be able to turn the tables. A few of his confidants knew about Gideon and nodded. Everyone split up. None of them were 1 or 2 years old, so they didn't need Thea to guide them step by step. The few people from Earth got rid of their initial fear and found that these aliens were not a big deal. Thea strolled around. Although it was called a port, it was actually a planet. With her supervision, she scanned the surroundings. There were very few residents here. The city was filled with various types of interstellar hunters, robbers, and mercenaries. There was no production of food or machinery. Everything depended on currency. She looked around and was slightly disappointed that there was no high-tech R&D facility like she had imagined. She left a few messages and returned to Earth with Poison Ivy. Thea returned to the metropolis first and found Diana. Only then did she know that Hercules had gone through another round of treatment. His own willpower was now strong enough to kill the tainted consciousness. He stopped after a little treatment. According to his original words to the Martian hunter, he wanted to rely on his own strength to defeat the devil in his heart. Did your business go well? Too well. Thea didn't do anything from the beginning to the end, and the battle was over. The corpse of the supervirus was still not found, even with Croydon's compass. Perhaps the compass didn't know what the supervirus was. She had gained a lot in these 3 days. More than 300 loyal fighters, the corpses of Mungo and Sludge, and many of Sinisto's private collections. The two girls chatted for a while before Thea left the metropolis alone and found a secluded cave. She was going to absorb the divine essence that Gaia had given her. She was already very familiar with the order of changing the magic structure in her body. First, she suppressed the 5 elements in her body and relied on her body's instinct to resonate with the divine essence. If the first time didn't work, she tried twice. If the second time didn't work, she tried thrice. Thea was very confident in her own talent. To a certain extent, as the wielder of the sacred sword, she also represented the wishes of the people. The power of the people's hearts would help her increase her chances of success. Sure enough, after 3 tries, her body and the divine power had completely merged. Thea looked carefully and found that it was the earth element magic that she urgently needed. Earth, fire, water, wind, light, and dark, the 6 elements began to form a small cycle in her body. The remaining divine power of Gaia was completely absorbed by her and turned into magic. The cycle in her body began to cycle endlessly. Thanks to the purity and thickness of Gaia's divine power, her overall magic level rapidly increased. Halfway through, she pulled out the sacred sword and underwent a heroic spirit transformation. Her body was scattered and reassembled, and during this process, many remnants of Gaia's divine power were expelled. Thea's method was simple and crude. She reduced the divine power to magic and then broke it down and reassembled it. Whatever was not suitable for her body was discarded regardless of whether it was good or bad. It was only 2 days later that she finished absorbing the magic. She carefully felt the vigorous and resilient magic in her body. This wasn't an external object like the lantern ring. The power in her body was now the purest magic in her body. Perhaps there were powerful existences that could change reality at a higher level and rob her of her power, but those existences were still far from her. Thea had already done what she thought was the best. It seems to be a little more than I expected. After casually casting a few spells, the 6 elements were no longer restricted. The recovery and consumption of magic were also reduced by 30%. This was the benefit of having all 6 elements. At this time, her magic had already recovered to the level before she cut off her doppelganger. The previous problem of her body being stronger than her magic had been solved. Magic had once again returned to the top of her list of abilities. This made her feel quite gratified. Otherwise, it would be really embarrassing to be a mage who swung her fists every day. The increase in magic only guaranteed her future direction and height, but there was no qualitative change in her current combat power. She needed more magic or divine power. Let's not talk about whether she could win or not. The attributes of the gods were too simple, so it wasn't her best choice. Black Adam and Shazan were the 2 targets that she had never given up on. These 2 were rare people with balanced attributes. As long as she could obtain the power of either one of them, Thea was confident that she could raise her strength to the peak of the demigod realm. Chapter 474. After becoming a demigod, one would become a new god. As long as one could obtain the source, anyone at the demigod level could become a new god. It didn't have to be at the peak of the demigod level. Thea had never seen a new god before, and she didn't know the difference between a peak demigod and a normal demigod. She could only assume that being at the peak of the demigod level would result in greater achievements in the future. How to obtain the source had troubled her for a long time. If she didn't want to go to the new planet of creation, Revelation Star, and beg the Heavenly Father and Darkside to accept her, then she could only look for the wild source. Zeus had been searching for it for thousands of years, and Thea's luck couldn't possibly be that good. Thus, she only had one choice left: to find the source behind the Wall of Origins. At first, she wanted to master the 7 emotions, evolve into a white lamp, and enter the Wall of Origins. Behind the wall was a light reservoir, the source of all the emotions in the universe, the life equation, and many of the source that Thea imagined to be hanging on an apple tree. This method was dangerous and uncontrollable. Kyle Rayner could enter after turning into a white lamp. Could she do the same? Kyle lost his memory after entering the Wall of Origins. No one knew if there was something affecting him inside. It was even hard to say if the person who came out would be Kyle himself. Thea wasn't a risk-taker. As long as there was a 10% chance of failure, she would be very careful. Fortunately, another method appeared not long after. With the help of the Holy Sword and her new talent, she could use the Holy Sword to communicate with the masses. By paying a huge amount of willpower, she might be able to change the rules and lure the source out from behind the wall. Many grains of sand made a tower, and many a little made a mickle. Eventually, the impossible became possible. This method seemed much safer than banging her head against the wall. Of course, the premise was that Sia had to do a lot of things related to order. It was impossible to hook up the source with the praises of hundreds of people. According to her own calculations, saving old ladies on the roadside and helping the disabled like Superman would at most count as a portion of the power of will. This level of savings would need at least 1 billion to hook up the source. There was still a long way to go. It wasn't just the matter of willpower. Black Adam and Shazam were still nowhere to be found. The clones of the little brat Billy Batson had been made quite a number. They could even form a wrestling team. However, old Shazam still needed a few more years to complete his mission. He lived in the subspace, and if he did not come out, no one could enter. Billy was quite easy to deal with. All he had to do was seal his mouth and have the clone with the voice most similar to his shout, Shazam. After obtaining the power, he could gift it to Thea. That's right, it was a direct gift. There was no need for any ceremony or sacrifice. It was safe and fast, and there would be no trouble in the future. Black Adam was much more troublesome. Thea only remembered that he was sealed somewhere in the Middle East in the original spacetime. It was the famous archaeologist Dr. Savannah who found the place where he was sealed and released him. As long as he could find the location of the seal, things would be easy. Black Adam's strength wasn't bad, but it wasn't to the extent that he couldn't be looked directly at. She could set up a trap in advance. When he came out, a group of people would surround him and beat him up. After that, they would knock him out and draw his blood to clone him. The key problem was that they couldn't find him. Thea not only planted spies in Dr. Savannah's expedition team, but also in several large expedition teams near the Middle East. However, after spending a lot of time and money, they couldn't find anything. Everything seemed to be telling her that the time wasn't right. She still needed to continue to endure. When she returned to the metropolis, she immediately began the preliminary preparations to do good deeds. Faced with the dazzling array of various difficult and complicated diseases in the market, there was no panacea. Even if there was one, she wouldn't immediately release it. Thea chose 2 diseases that were considered to have a large number of patients to begin the preliminary research and development. Amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, which was a type of motor neuron disease. Patients generally only lived for 2 to 5 years, and there was no cure. In addition, she chose spontaneous interstitial pneumonia. The patients only had half a year to live. The only treatment at present was a lung transplant, but the success rate was pitifully low. With her profound knowledge in genetics, she led the scientists of her own group to research for half a month. The 2 new drugs began to enter the clinical stage. Compared to Luther's advanced technology, she was only developing 2 special drugs. She was not afraid of suspicion at all. However, speak of the devil. She had just left the laboratory for 2 days when Luther came knocking on her door. Seeing that he dismissed his entourage, Thea asked calmly, "What's the matter?" Both of them were in the metropolis, but they adhered to the principle of not seeing each other. This was the first time she saw Luther since the Kryptonian incident. The madman who wanted to pull Superman down from his pedestal was a little emotional today. This was a little different from his usual calm style. "You developed a special drug for amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, right?" Thea thought a lot in her mind. She didn't expect him to mention the special drug. Anyway, they had entered the clinical stage. They basically knew what they needed to know. In the future, they would rely on special drugs to treat patients. There was nothing to hide. Thea nodded and readily admitted it. "Can you let me see the current clinical report?" "So urgent?" Thea was a little confused. She didn't want to steal trade secrets directly. The 2 companies were so large that the market for 1 or 2 special drugs was too small for them. "Sure." Thea took out a thick report from her desk and handed it to him. She had no doubt that he could understand it. Luther could indeed understand it. He was also a person who had gone a long way on the path of cloning. Genetic science was not a problem for him. However, Thea relied on the knowledge of the entire universe and the Kryptonians. He had to rely on self-study, so there would definitely be blind spots that he missed. He read the first few pages of the disease introduction very quickly. He only paid attention to the treatment process and results later. Thea was busy with her work. Luther could read freely. However, it was impossible for Thea to serve him tea and give up her seat. The room was extremely quiet. Only the rustling of Thea's writing and the rustling of Luther's paper could be heard. My sister has the same disease. Luther finished reading the report and let out a long sigh. He seemed to be talking to himself. Lena Luther? Thea was a little surprised. The well-behaved little girl was still holding the shares of her new company. They hadn't seen each other for a long time. Yes, it's been a year. I also want to develop a new drug, but I haven't been sure. Are you sure there won't be any side effects? Thea smiled. It's rare to see you so worried. Of course, I have my own confidence. You've seen the experiment report. I don't need to explain too much to you. Luther suppressed his excitement and said, "Good," 3 times in a row. He didn't talk nonsense and directly opened the door to leave Quinn Merlin Group. Chapter 475. Thea did not intend to use such a special drug to suppress Luther. She was going to gain fame anyway, so it did not matter who she gave it to. Her bottom line was not so low as to let the little girl suffer and wait for death while she used a few pills as a bargaining chip. The clinical trial was progressing very quickly. She had a lot of follow-up plans, so she did not want to spend too much time on it. She ordered several departments to speed up production. Luther had seen the composition of the medicine, but he did not dare to give it to his sister directly. He also hoped to see her special drug on the market. Many patients were treated as guinea pigs. He had to wait and see for a while. The more patients there were, the more confidence he would have. Quinn Group's public relations was focused on the new product, and Luther was quietly pushing it from behind. The two of them worked together, and the various procedures were completed very quickly. Countless social elites helped the government to promote the magic of the 2 special drugs. The president urgently sought help from his staff. He almost thought that the whole country had contracted these 2 diseases. He was relieved to know that only a few people had contracted these diseases. He had to give face to the elites from all walks of life. Even if it was a poison, he had to approve it. He skipped the layers of approval and directly signed the approval for the special drug to be on the market. It was a terminal illness in modern medicine, but it was not a big deal in the field of genetics. They only needed to slightly adjust the internal structure of the gene. Thea's special drug had been on the market for a week, and the 2 diseases had been classified from terminal illnesses to the level of colds and fevers. Seeing that countless patients had been cured without any sequelae or complications, Luther bought a bunch of medicine for his sister. The little girl, who was originally lying in a wheelchair, regained basic mobility after 3 days. She was completely normal after 5 days. The little girl, Lena Luther, did not have as many concerns as her brother. She personally went to thank him. The 2 of them were very polite and complimented each other. Because of their opposing sides, they did not talk too much. However, from Lena's words, Thea could tell that Luther had made progress in his research on Doomsday. As for Supergirl's uncle, Norn, and the other 3 Kryptonian elites, they had all been killed by Luther. As a result of the battle of wits between the simple Kryptonians and the Earthlings, they had offered up their bodies and all their knowledge. It took Luther a lot of time to digest this gift. Now that the seed had been planted, all that was left was to water it and wait. With the corpses of the Kryptonians and the genetic technology that he had pieced together, it was not difficult to develop the remaining Doomsday genes on his own. After all, this was the super biochemical weapon that the Kryptonian scientists had developed based on their own bodies. The characteristic of the biochemical weapon was that it could be spread widely, and its structure was not difficult to construct. With Luther's intelligence, he could easily discover the huge opportunity of breeding in the Kryptonian cells. In this time and space, there was no pseudo-artificial intelligence on the Kryptonian spaceship to remind him. He probably did not know the name Doomsday, but it was enough to know that this biochemical weapon could harm Superman. Unlike in the movies, the military was also busy researching the Kryptonian genes. They did not have Luthor's high intelligence, but they had the geographical advantage. When General Zod's spaceship was broken into 3 pieces, they collected the wreckage and reverse-engineered it. Coupled with the little information left in the spaceship, they managed to achieve some initial results by relying on the strength of numbers. What surprised Thea even more was that the military had forcibly conscripted the mad scientist, Dr. Avio. Without caring about the cost, they had started Project Demogorgon. A large amount of manpower and material resources had been poured into this project. It could be said that they had carried the spirit of seeking death to the extreme. Thea could stop Luthor, but the military was more troublesome. These people were stubborn. Only when they saw the power of Doomsday would they be able to extinguish the fantasy in their hearts. Thea's plan was to sit back and watch Doomsday cause a ruckus. Then she would come out and clean up the mess. She wasn't the one who planned this, nor was she the one who supported it. No matter how she looked at it, she had nothing to do with Doomsday. The scales of order would only reward her for bravely jumping out at the crucial moment, and would not blame her for it. However, she was not going to just sit around and wait. Some basic preparations still had to be done. She had collected a lot of kryptonite in the early stages. It was more than enough to make a few weapons. However, she did not completely trust her memory. Reality had changed too much. If she did things according to her fixed thinking, it would be troublesome. She began to carefully study Doomsday's cells. She had done so several times. She could not understand why Doomsday, who resembled the holy warrior of the DC world, could not use the same move twice. It should be known that Doomsday was able to withstand Darkseid's Omega Ray in the later stages. Omega Ray represented the source. Doomsday's body could evolve without limit. Every time he was killed, he would be immune to the previous fatal damage when he was resurrected. This ability was not something his body possessed. It was provided by the continuous evolution of his cells. Sia's research showed that each of its cells was actually a tiny individual. Doomsday was more like a collection of wills. Its body relied on a special kind of energy to pile up all its cells, forming a powerful individual that the world saw. From the looks of his cells, did this guy have a soul? On the surface, he did not have a soul in the traditional sense. However, the collective will formed by the many cell wills was extremely chaotic. This made him immune to most control magic in the world. Thea tried to duplicate a few of his cells. She found that they fused very quickly. However, they devoured each other to evolve. The madness revealed by this made her a little scared. This was not a creature that should exist in this world. The Kryptonian scientists had not come up with a countermeasure for tens of thousands of years. She also did not plan to destroy it in the path of science. The advantage of having all 6 elements was that Thea could cast any spells. She could even cast some more powerful combination spells. The cell's ability to absorb the 4 elements was top-notch. They hated the light element and did not like the dark element either. Thea experimented with both light and dark spells. Finally, she found a spell that worked. It was aging, a spell that combined the dark element, wind element, and water element. The vitality of the cells affected by the spell decreased visibly. In order to resist the spell, the cells would release all the vitality in the cells in an instant. For a short period of time, the vitality of the cells would be boosted. After that, the output of magic would increase, and the cells would quickly die due to exhaustion. After experimenting with a few spells, she also tested the power of emotion. The emotion of fear was the same as the will of death and destruction in the cells. Doomsday could not replicate the emotion of fear, which was contrary to its basic form of existence. However, fear could not do anything to it. Chapter 476. The last test was the Holy Sword. In theory, the crystallization of the will of all living beings could kill Doomsday. Thea tested it 3 times in a row. Even the reborn cells of Doomsday could not figure out the principle of the Holy Sword. It could not be simulated or replicated at all. The only drawback was that the Holy Sword would consume too much power to deal with the crazy will, and it could not kill it completely. Thea felt that Doomsday probably had something similar to the Source in it. It symbolized the idea of destruction in the universe. As long as this behavior existed, it would never die. The Holy Sword was the last step. If the kryptonite failed to kill it, Thea thought of a safe way to seal it. This was the traditional method summed up by countless heroes in the process of dealing with the Great Demon. The space technology of the Kryptonians was not top-notch. Hundreds of people could escape from their so-called shadow area if they were slightly affected by the energy waves. Thea just looked at it and gave up. The infiltration of the neutral port in the oasis was still going on secretly, but it was not a problem to buy a few high-tech cages at a high price. Fiora sent her 3 different types of sealing devices in a day. Thea's plan was to use high-tech, the lamp, the ring, and magic together, and then throw it into the corner of the universe. Originally, the Wall of Origin was a good choice, but she was afraid that it would cause other unforeseen events. If this thing evolved to the extent that it could break the wall, who in the universe could withstand it? The sealing devices of several civilizations had their merits. To combine these technologies with Thea's own ability, she still needed to do a lot of preparation. It was not Sia to write down her good deeds in her diary without leaving her name. She did not have such high awareness, not to mention at such a time when she needed a lot of praise. The 2 special drugs were a great success, and dozens of patients who were about to die were pulled to the metropolis by her for a live press conference. The patients did not deliberately put on a show. They wept and cried about the joy of their desperate situation. The reporters took photos crazily. Thea said a few words and left the scene to the CEOs of the group. She saw Bruce Wayne, who was in a suit, was winking at her and asking the people around to leave. The 2 of them walked to a place where no one was around. She asked, "What's the matter? Do you recognize this symbol?" Bruce said as he drew a big omega for her to see. "Omega? Aren't you asking the obvious?" Thea had a vague guess. Bruce thought about the language again and again. "I have this symbol in my mind and a memory that I have personally experienced but have no recollection of." At first, he could not express himself clearly in English, so he had to switch a few languages before he finally managed to express his feelings. He felt that it might be something from the mystical realm that was affecting him, and that was why he went to the metropolis today. However, Thea knew that it was the flash from some unknown point in time that reminded Batman of some time and space. But in the original time and space, it was because of the battle of superhumans. Now in this time and space, the differences between the 2 still existed. It was still very big, but it was definitely not to the point of tearing each other apart. So what did the Flash come back to remind him of? She didn't know the answer to that question, and neither did Batman. She deliberated over her words. There was no need to tell him the whole story, but a simple introduction was still fine. "I can't explain the different life trajectories you mentioned. It's beyond my ability. But this symbol, if you're not here to test me on the Greek alphabet, then I probably know something about it." Thea's words were very vague, but Bruce's attention was still drawn to her. "Do you still remember the guy in the green tights during the battle at Seaside City?" "I've done my research. Hal Jordan used to belong to Ferris Aerospace. He was an excellent test pilot," Bruce said without hesitation. "Yes, but he has a new boss now. He now belongs to the universe's police force, the Green Lantern Corps. He's in charge of this area of Earth. What I want to talk about is his new employer. They are the oldest race in the universe, and now they call themselves the Guardians. You know, I'm the Yellow Lantern. I used to be close to the Green Lanterns." Bruce wanted to say, "What the hell do I know?" But when it came to such secret knowledge, talking about the universe and ancient races at the drop of a hat sounded very impressive. Like a detective, he listened attentively and nodded against his will. In the records of the Guardians, before them, there was a group of people outside this world. They called themselves the New Gods. They lived in an untouchable place. Because of their ideals, personalities, and other reasons, the New Gods split into 2. One was the righteous father, and the other was the evil dark side. In fact, Thea didn't want to use such a superficial division of good and evil, but she couldn't reveal too many details. Why was he so familiar with an untouchable place? If Bruce asked, she wouldn't be able to answer. She could only use a hearsay to distinguish between the father and Uncle de Bruce also had his own values, and he felt that her hasty division of good and evil was a little arbitrary. But considering that Thea was most likely repeating the records of her predecessors, he didn't say anything. The Omega symbol you described represents the evil lord, Darkside. Thea spread her hands, indicating that she only knew that much. Bruce nodded. Thea didn't explain in detail, but his doubts were finally answered. If he was asked what his relationship with Darkside was, he would say that he had nothing to do with it. The two of them had nothing to do with each other. Bruce was protecting his own land, and Darkside was spreading evil across the universe. These things were completely unrelated. If it weren't for the war with Darkside, Thea would have had the same thoughts as him. They were on completely different levels. Earth was no different from an ant in Uncle Da's eyes. Who knew what was wrong with him to invade Earth? Bruce felt that it was not a bad guy from Earth who did this to him, so he was much more relieved. The only questions he had were buried in his heart, waiting for the truth to be discovered in the future. The two of them chatted for a while and said goodbye to each other. Thea's life returned to normal. On the surface, she was still working on solving the incurable diseases of mankind. In the past, this would have been a big deal. But now, whether it was Luther's Cadmus project or the military's Yamatron project, they were attracting the attention of people with ulterior motives. A huge amount of money and technology had been thrown into the water. The big shots were on tenterhooks every day. They hoped that they would produce results, but they were also afraid of a devastating disaster. Eldest Mrs. Action's of researching a special medicine when she had nothing better to do was really not within their scope of concern. The few of them only paid attention to it verbally and lightly brushed it aside. Chapter 477. After probing twice, she found that everything was calm and there was no response from the higher-ups. Sia directly announced a new treatment plan for cancer. Together with her new medical cabin, as long as the patient was not dying, the cancer cells would be completely killed in one day at most. It was a worldwide shock. There was no doubt that the Nobel Prize in Medicine would belong to her. Her name had already entered some medical textbooks, and patients all over the world who were suffering from terminal diseases saw hope. In a short time, a huge amount of willpower entered the balance of order. The young lady was so beautiful that she walked with the wind. She and Diana learned from each other all day long and suppressed each other for the first time, achieving a glorious result of both career and love. She relied on her own technology to gain great popularity, and the Quinn Merlin Group also rose. More than a dozen scientists in the medical department did not sleep every day to compare experimental reports, for fear of mistakes. Many young people also came to apply for jobs. It was fine if the pay was low, but they wanted to add the name of the Quinn Group to their resume. Scholars and scientists from all over the world came to visit. The Quinn Group set up a reception department of hundreds of people to deal with learning discussions and exchange experiences from all walks of life. Compared to Luther, who hid underground every day to do his experiments, Thea's reputation suddenly reached the level of Buddha. She did not slack off and gave speeches everywhere to increase her reputation. Even the medical staff who lost their jobs because of her medical cabin did not dare to publicly scold her now. Her reputation was too high. At this time, Thea was in the Buckingham Palace in England. She was interviewed by the Times and said the content hundreds of times. She changed a few words and said it once with emotion to complete the task. After the interview, Thea also met the Queen of England. The old lady looked very kind, holding her hand and chatting. The old lady did not know that she was lucky. If this was still a feudal society, the young lady would have pulled out the sword of victory and pledge and asked to inherit the throne of England. Thea casually said a few words and then left. She did not go straight home, but went to Diana's new apartment. "What's wrong? Something on your mind?" Diana was not in the mood tonight. The two of them were only wearing pajamas. Thea asked in a low voice. "I can't say for sure. I feel uneasy, as if something is about to happen." Thea couldn't guess such a vague and ambiguous thing, so the two could only hug each other to sleep. The matter of the special medicine was about to come to an end, and the path of obtaining the power of will had just begun. In that indescribable ancient country, There was a saying that there were 3 immortals. To establish virtue was to establish morality. To establish virtue was to say something with penetrating insight. Neither of these two were suitable for today's utilitarian era, but to establish merit was feasible. In fact, the starting point of Luther and the military's plan was also related to this. They were either billionaires or high-ranking officials, so they didn't have many pursuits for themselves. This was why they came up with the so-called Cadmus Plan and the Yamadan Plan for the future of humanity. The starting point was good, but their actions were too self-centered, and they didn't really put the welfare of the ordinary people first. They never considered what ordinary people lacked. Instead, they considered what they should give to ordinary people. This so-called democratic system was, in fact, an elite system for the minority. Thea herself was also a beneficiary of this system. She didn't have the sentiments of those great sages who claimed to change certain realities. She could only do what she could to make the lives of ordinary people better. Physical illness was the first step, and cultural dissemination was the second step. Ordinary people on Earth were too backward. They didn't care about dark side, and many people were unwilling to believe in the existence of aliens. They stubbornly followed their own path of life, working, studying, and living. This was the current situation of ordinary people. Thea hoped that through her own efforts, she could change the minds of ordinary people. Aliens weren't as bad as in the movies. Many alien technology products were very convenient and should be introduced. She even encouraged some scientists to go out instead of cooped up in the laboratory thinking about how to blow up Earth. The road had to be taken step by step. At the very least, some ideas had to be changed. Otherwise, it would be too tiring for her to be the only one leading the way. She couldn't drive a car to work in the morning and take a maglev back home at night. The technological leap wasn't that fast, so she needed some time to adapt. As for the new breakthrough, the scene of Superman and Diana learning the Tamarin language gave her some inspiration. Learn the universal language. General Lane and the others had just taken their seats in the Alien Management Committee when Thea dropped a bombshell and asked them to discuss it. The meeting this time was very important. The black man, Digger, had come as a temporary service member and handed over documents to the representatives. He was also a little nervous because as a middle-level member of the administrative committee, he was also required to learn the common language. God had mercy on him. He only knew English and a few Afghan phrases like surrender and kneel down. Learning something as high-end as the universal language was giving him a headache. He was having a headache because his perspective was too low. The other participants understood the implications, especially when the military was trying to crack the Kryptonian spaceship. Language was a stumbling block, and they were the ones who were most affected by it. Looking at the bitter faces of these people, Sia wanted to laugh. Her memories as a transmigrator made her realize how terrible it was for all the people in this country to learn English. It was the cycle of life, and now it was time for them to taste the bitterness of it. As for asking all the aliens in the universe to speak English, even the most arrogant and irrational general in the military wouldn't say that. Everyone, we will have to leave Earth sooner or later. The era is advancing rapidly. Learning the language and communicating with the aliens on an equal footing should be the responsibility of the committee. Thea easily put the project on her shoulders. The white people who slaughtered the Native Americans had the most right to say what would happen if they didn't communicate with the aliens. Dr. Quinn, what do you mean? Joan Finch was a 50-year-old middle-aged woman who represented the government in Kentucky. She had no problem convincing her constituents, but she couldn't help but tremble when she was in a weak position and had to communicate with the aliens. Thea saw her sallow face and knew that she had misunderstood. This pure politician probably thought that she was going to attack with a spaceship. What I mean is very simple. It's just a preliminary preparation. Based on the principle of voluntary participation, we will neither advertise nor ignore it. We will publish a set of teaching materials in the name of the committee. Anyone who wants to learn can buy them. The middle-aged woman's face regained some color. General Lane and Steve Trevor were both patients with persecutory delusions. For them, it was always good to be prepared. Unless Earth conquered the universe, learning the alien language was a hurdle that couldn't be avoided. Chapter 478. The committee's daily expenses were in the hundreds of thousands, so the learning materials that were mentioned didn't cost much. Several people agreed with Thea's proposal, but each of them went back and told the big shots behind them about today's far-reaching, small matter. The few big shots had higher expectations. Perhaps some of them only wanted to preserve what they had, but this was not something they could change. When the aliens came knocking on their door, they would be the first to suffer losses. Compared to Luther and the military's method of focusing on making big weapons, Xia's method of silently moisturizing things made people feel comfortable. It was not difficult to guess their thoughts. If Luther succeeded and wanted to use force to gain more power, who among the politicians would give him a place? Or let him wipe out everyone and become a dictator? Thea's method was very popular with the politicians, and no one stopped her. The learning materials that she wrote in the name of the committee chairman were quickly produced. There was no shortage of people with foresight. The first 100,000 sets of learning materials were sold out before they even entered the market. People like Luther directly bought 1,000 sets and distributed them to the people in the company. Those who couldn't learn were directly kicked out. Bruce Wayne also bought a few sets and prepared to give them to the Bat team. Leaders of various countries, foreign affairs personnel, spy organizations, whether it was the king or the president, more or less bought a few sets. It wasn't a nuclear weapon, and the Americans were open-minded enough to let them pass, as they had the intention of dealing with the big trouble together. After that, Thea urgently produced more than 100,000 sets. This time, the sales were relatively weak. Many ordinary people thought it was an April Fool's joke, and only a few people realized something. But after all, they were the minority, and their opinions were quickly drowned in the laughter of the crowd. Thea didn't care too much about this. Fixed ideas were not so easy to break. The seeds of hope had been sown and would slowly grow. Seeing that Batman's team was not tired of learning, the young lady didn't forget her own brothers. Although Thea felt that the average education level of the Green Arrow team was only in junior high school, she still brought a pile of learning materials back to Star City. When she returned to the secret base she opened, the current Green Arrow base, she found that there was one more person there. Roy Harper, Thea's lover in the original space-time, was currently being trained by Oliver. "It's so lively." Thea wanted to laugh when she saw the bustling scene in the base. 2 green arrows, 1 black arrow, and 1 red arrow who had yet to graduate. This must be the Star City Archery Club. When she walked into the base, the 4 of them were training in full swing. Felicity and Laurel, who didn't know any martial arts, were watching them from a distance. However, after careful observation, Thea found that Laurel's fingers also had traces of archery practice, which made her even more speechless. "Thea!" The first person to notice her was naturally Olivier. They all greeted her in a friendly manner. Roy Harper was also a little nervous as he thanked her for saving his mother. When she passed the study materials to them, their expressions were a little strange. Felicity, Laurel, and Shadow had all graduated from university, so they weren't under much pressure. They flipped through the pages seriously. Olivier, Tommy, and Roy Harper were all bad students. The first 2 didn't study hard, and the last one didn't study hard because his family couldn't afford to. The 3 of them had very poor foundations. Even though Sia had made it easy to understand when she wrote it, they still had bitter expressions on their faces. Thea felt that they could all learn. Olivier and Tommy's bodies had been modified by God's blood and genofluid. Their learning ability had surpassed the average level of smart people. As long as they put in the effort, it would be easy for them to learn. They chatted briefly. Thea found out that Olivier had met Batman through Laurel and Barbara's recommendation. Both of them had similar beliefs and experiences. Plus, Thea was a senior superhero. As a senior superhero, Batman told Green Arrow a lot about his experience. Green Arrow, who had been wavering, finally decided not to kill. After seeing the training of the 3rd-generation Red Robin, he also had the idea of training an assistant. After that, the brave and tenacious Roy Harper came into his sight. After getting the approval of the team, he began to train the young man. Under the relentless attacks of the archery club, the security of Star City had recovered. Olivier even defeated the Death Archer in a one-on-one battle and handed the captive of the Death Archer to Amanda, who came after hearing the news. With their series of victories, the underground forces of Star City were forced into hibernation. After leaving the Green Arrow team, Thea went to see Moira. Her mother had entered the second year of her second term as the mayor of Star City. The mother and daughter had a few intimate words. Moira had already let go of her daughter. She had flown too far and too high. Do you think my next step should be the Congress or the White House? Moira enjoyed the feeling of power in her hands. She knew that Thea now had great influence. She wanted to hear her daughter's opinion. If Moira had asked this question a few years ago, Thea would definitely have told her to stay in Star City. The outside world was too dangerous. But now that her vision was broadened and her strength had skyrocketed, the threat of the secular world and the universe to her was rapidly decreasing. There were definitely many who were stronger than her, but she was not very afraid. In the past, she thought that even if the sky fell, the tall people would shoulder it. Now, she thought that even if the sky fell, they would shoulder it together. So she decisively answered Moira, "President, run for president." What was the point of being a senator? Although the president's power was limited, it was still awe-inspiring. Ordinary citizens basically knew who the president was. If you asked them who the senator of their state was, few would be able to answer. Moira herself was not weak. Her 2 terms as the mayor of Star City had ended. Her political achievements could blind many people. Plus, she was a woman, the first female president in the history of the United States. This attracted a lot of attention. Women's affinity was an important guarantee for the future uniting of the Earth's human beings into the interstellar era. When mankind carefully stepped into space, what they needed was not an iron-blooded strong person. That was purely courting death. Moira's background and her relationship with Thea made it very likely that she would be elected. Luther, a businessman, could run for president. Her mother would have no problem. Seeing Thea resolutely let her run for the White House, Moira was very moved. She did not have any dedication. She just felt that this was a crucial step to realize the value of life. Now that she had her daughter's support, thoughts instantly appeared in her mind. Which ally should she rope in and who should she make some exchange of interests? Thea encouraged her mother to run for president. Naturally, she also took defensive measures against her into consideration. Chapter 479. Moira's physical fitness was not bad. Her bodyguards were not as strong as her, but she did not know how to use it. Occasionally, she would do some fitness exercises. Thea taught her a few moves and knew that her mother had no combat awareness at all. Even if she could run faster than a bullet, she would not think of subduing a gunman. Running faster than a bullet was unrealistic. Milady's gene optimization fluid was not that powerful, but her physical fitness was solid. Even if she did not have consciousness, she still had some dynamic vision and muscle reaction. Considering that it would be 2 years before she became the president, and it would be relatively safe in the next 2 years, Sia did not make too many arrangements. She only made 2 magic gems. One was a defensive magic that could defend against rifle grenades, and the other was a teleportation magic. She put some thought into setting the coordinates. If Moira was attacked, Quinn's old house and her mayor's office might not be safe. Thea could only set the coordinates to her laboratory in the metropolis, which was under Gideon's control. Without hundreds of people with modern weapons, it would be impossible to break in. The incident with the teleportation gem also reminded her that there were many ordinary people on her side. Even Oliver, who was the most skilled, could dodge ordinary firearms with his outstanding combat talent and physical fitness. However, if more than 100 people with submachine guns were to fire at him, he would be finished. The remaining people in the team were even more hopeless. After bidding farewell to Moira, Thea went back to the Green Arrow's base and told them her idea. According to their personal wishes, she made a teleportation gem for each of them. Even Roy Harper was given one. The young man was a little confused by the sudden appearance of such a magical item in the real world, but he still took it. "I'll give you 2. Sia looked at Felicity, a former hacker who could not tell the difference between food and drink. She was clearly a weakling, but she still liked to go to dangerous places. Unlike the original space-time, the green arrow's triangle was torn to pieces. Without the black man as a buffer, Oliver's stubbornness was unbearable. Oliver and Tommy, Laurel and Shadow. The four of them were intertwined with each other. Outsiders would feel dizzy just by looking at them. No one would want to get involved. In this space-time, Felicity and Oliver's relationship was only SOSO. Although she didn't go to the metropolis to take care of her mother, she stayed in Star City instead. She only helped out a few times because of Laurel, her sister. She stayed in the Green Arrow team as a family member. Considering her nature of seeking death, Thea had also injected her with the gene optimization fluid. However, she was the same type as Moira. In layman's terms, she was trash. It was useless to give her the physique of a new god. She made a few gems on the spot and taught them how to use them. Thea told them to learn the common language well before she left Star City. Her relatives and friends all had teleportation gems, and Diana naturally wouldn't forget about it. Although Thea didn't think that there was anyone who could beat Diana to the point that she couldn't fight back, she still had to be prepared. Diana's thoughts were similar to what she had expected. She was about to run away. Could Earth still be saved? However, she still accepted the teleportation gems modestly. With Thea's frequent actions, more and more people, not just in the metropolis, realized that aliens did exist. There were few fools in modern society. Especially after seeing that the officials didn't refute the rumors but instead acquiesced to them, many citizens felt anxious. Thea's learning materials finally caused a sensation. A large number of citizens began to scramble for them. However, she soon found that there were many pessimistic voices on some small forums and social media sites. Aliens were invincible, Earthlings were weak. There were all kinds of opinions. She was overreacting. She saw that the power of Vow on the order scale had decreased by a small amount. She felt that people's hearts were unpredictable. What should she do? Increase the publicity. It was nonsense to tell ordinary people about the Guardians and the new gods. Moreover, Thea couldn't personally tell them about this. She couldn't possibly explain to ordinary people how she knew about this. Therefore, it was necessary for an alien to tell the story. Princess Starfire, whom she met a while ago, was a good candidate. First of all, she was a righteous person. Even if she was scolded, she wouldn't do anything extreme. Secondly, her appearance. If one didn't look at her green eyes, she would definitely be a beauty. In fact, if one got used to it, green eyes wouldn't be unacceptable. When Thea took over the Yellow Lantern Corps, she only remembered asking Superman to arrange a place for her to stay. As for the specific location, she had to ask Superman. She activated her supervision and found Superman at the scene of a fire. Princess Starfire. Bro Superman scratched his head in response to Thea's question. But did something happen to her? No, but I asked the Martian hunters to take care of her. Superman said vaguely. Thea was confused. Under her continuous questioning, Bro Superman didn't say anything. Then she went to look for the Martian hunters. Only then did she know that Superman's Louise was jealous of Hai Xingbo. In order to not cause any conflicts in the family, she could only throw the beautiful Princess Starfire to the Martian hunters. After asking for the address, Thea went to Starfire's apartment. Just as she was about to knock on the door, she saw the door open from the inside. The tall and handsome Nightwing, Dick Grayson, was holding hands with Princess Starfire. They were about to go out. What a coincidence, what a coincidence. After knowing each other for so many years, it was impossible to pretend not to know each other. Dick Grayson could only awkwardly greet Thea. This was a winner in life. Even though he had broken up with Barbara, he still had some feelings for her. Occasionally, they would even have some friendly sex. This was even more impressive. Starfire had only been on Earth for a short period of time, but the two of them had already hooked up. Thea could only admire them. Originally, she was worried that she wasn't familiar with Starfire. Now that Nightwing was acting as the middleman, it was easier for them to talk. Thea forcefully pulled back Nightwing, who was about to run away. Your Bridhaven doesn't need to be saved. You can leave after you finish my business. After briefly explaining her original intention, Thea began to talk about her goal. Miss Starfire, Are you willing to do a television program to introduce Earthlings to extraterrestrials? From your point of view, don't scare the citizens, but don't nurture their arrogance. Television program? Starfire and Nightwing looked at each other. What should I say? I can't possibly talk about Tam Allen, right? Sure, you can say whatever you want. You know, Earth's scientific research ability isn't weak. We can bring many extraterrestrial technological products to Earth. At this time, you just have to help promote it. However, in the early stages of the program, there will likely be some negative comments. You have to be mentally prepared. Chapter 480. Spark had come to Earth alone, but she was a playful person. Otherwise, she would not have met Nightwing, who was running around the streets. As a righteous person, she could not rob others even if she did not have any income. Now that Thea offered her a job opportunity, she thought about it carefully. Seeing that Nightwing did not object, she agreed. The TV program definitely couldn't be made boring. If Spark were to read the script on stage alone and talk about extraterrestrials, and the wonders of extraterrestrial technology, no one would watch it. She also had to find an assistant. This person had to be an Earthling with good looks and not afraid of aliens. It would be best if he or she had some experience in recording TV programs. With so many conditions, there were not many candidates, but Thea soon found a suitable candidate. The former anchor lady was recalled to Earth by her. You still want me to do the program? The former anchor lady was a little frustrated. She was forced to do it to make a living. Now that she was so powerful, did she still have to do it? Yes, she had to do it. The young lady's order was unquestionable, so the former anchor lady had to come out again. Spark was not difficult to get along with. Although the anchor lady was still a little unhappy, returning to the program recording site gave her an illusion that it was a lifetime ago. Everything was paved with money. The first episode of the program was broadcasted smoothly. Princess Spark did not need to tell the Earthlings how big the universe was. She just focused on the environment she grew up in and the humanities. The experienced anchor lady asked some questions at the right time, and the two worked well together for the first time. Once the program was broadcasted, the response was not very enthusiastic. However, Spark's beautiful appearance and sincere voice still received some praise. Thea did not expect much abuse, which made her more confident in the follow-up plan. Except for Luther, who was a little dissatisfied that the anchor lady no longer mocked Superman, it was generally very harmonious. The control of Iben Trading Company was in full swing. One of their 15 decision-makers had been secretly controlled by Jared. The next step was to control their active computers and lead the robots to rebel. The Yellow Lantern Corps set things right at the critical moment. They started with the armed forces and gradually nibbled away this neutral universe business alliance. Later, they would develop their forces and feed back some technological equipment to Earth. The neutral camp was the entry point that Thea prepared for Earth to go out of the solar system in the future. After determining the future direction of development, Moira's enthusiasm was unprecedentedly high. In order to expand her network, she decided to hold a grand Christmas dinner in the name of the city government. Naturally, her children were all present. Even Diana, who had a bad premonition, was pulled over by Thea. Mrs. Quinn, I've heard a lot about you. Diana bowed slightly. Her etiquette was impeccable. It was the etiquette of a junior to an elder. Miss Prince, I often hear Thea talk about you. Moira was well aware of the relationship between the beautiful woman in front of her and her daughter. Nowadays, this was not a rare thing. Since they were willing, Moira was naturally not dissatisfied. She gently held Diana's hand and said a few words. Soon, other guests arrived. Thea pulled Diana aside. Your mother is very elegant. She's an amazing person. When Diana saw that a woman had achieved something, she thought that the woman was a good person. This idea was deeply ingrained in her mind and could not be changed. Yeah, don't you think she's a bit similar to Queen Hippolyte? Thea joked. That's true. No wonder I feel so close to her. Diana thought about it seriously and nodded solemnly. Thea was amused. These women in power had the same basic characteristics. As if to prove her point, another middle-aged woman chatted with Moira. It was Lex Luthor's mother, Lydithea Luthor. She had brought her daughter, Lena Luther, to the dinner party. Not long after, Oliver brought Shadow and Tommy brought Laurel to the venue. Moira's ambition was not small this time. She had mobilized all her connections, and with Sia's timely help, there were a lot of politicians on the scene. The vice president, members of Congress, several ministers, and many socialites who had received the invitation were all present. The safety of the politicians could not be neglected. The Super Investigation Bureau of the Heavens Eye Society had sent their best men to protect the guests. The Martian hunter, who pretended to be cool every day, was also present. Not only was he present, but the Gotham tycoon Bruce Wayne and this year's Pulitzer Prize winner, Clark Kent, were also present. Thea's eyelids twitched when she saw them. However, they had to pretend not to know each other. This was a severe test for Diana and Superman, whose acting was slightly immature. There were even more irrelevant people, such as Catwoman and Louise Lane, who were relatives, and Damian and Raven, who were there to eat and drink. Thea even saw Spark and Nightwing whispering to each other, which made Barbara, who came with her father, unhappy. Barry Allen, who did not have much combat power, Felicity, a few friends from the Star City Laboratory, Caitlin Snow, her fiancé Ronnie Raymond, and Cisco Ramon were all present. Some of them were Oliver's friends, while others were Thea's friends. With so many young people gathered together, it was quite a lively scene. Seeing Thea sizing up the venue, Diana was a little puzzled. What's wrong? Did something happen? Of course, Thea could not say that with so many heroes with the luck of protagonists gathered together, she would not be surprised if a dark side jumped out in the next second. She laughed awkwardly, indicating that she was fine. However, things in the world were always unpredictable. When you thought of something, the good might not necessarily come, but the bad would definitely come. Pretending to walk past casually, Clark Kent whispered to her with his old-fashioned eyes, "There's a group of people 5 miles away, armed with guns. They seem to be coming here. Also, there seems to be a mole in this venue." Thea immediately activated her supervision to observe the interior of the venue. She did not notice it before, but now she realized that some of the staff present had fierce looks and a fierce temperament. Even though they kept their heads down, she could still see that they were up to no good from the corner of her eyes. Following Superman's instructions, he observed the movement 10 miles away. It was indeed a small gang. There were more than 30 people, and they were armed with all kinds of guns. The leader was a tall and strong man. He was discussing something in 2 trucks. They were heading straight for the city hall. Thea heaved a sigh of relief. There was nothing to be afraid of. She did not know the soldiers, but she had seen a picture of the leader. Wasn't that the brick wall who had recently disappeared? The waiters in the venue were Keanu's men, codenamed White Porcelain, of the Triad. Thea even saw a few men with indescribable Minon characteristics helping in the kitchen. Chapter 481. In addition to a few spies in the venue, their leader, nicknamed White Porcelain, was wearing a wig to cover up her white hair. She was wearing a high-slit cheongsam and was greeting guests at the entrance. Thea felt sorry for them. There were so many heroes here, it would be safer for them to rob the White House. They were so stupid. The heroes here could beat the shit out of them. However, there were so many heroes that they had to worry about. Who was going to do it? Uncle Ronjen, can you control their minds? Thea contacted the Martian hunter telepathically. The result was as she expected. The Martian hunter refused without hesitation. "I won't use my ability on ordinary people. You deal with it yourself." Thea sighed. Fortunately, Superman was a warm-hearted person and volunteered to deal with the people in the brick wall. They could detect abnormalities with their special abilities. Some of the bodyguards and agents of the politicians also noticed the abnormalities of these people. Agents sounded powerful, but in fact, they were only at a slightly higher level than ordinary people. If they took action first and caused a commotion, they would directly destroy the venue that Moira had carefully prepared. This was something that Thea would not allow. Also, the identities of many superheroes could not be exposed. This made her a little cautious. After whispering to Thea to make a big noise to attract the attention of the agents in the venue, she whispered to Oliver. "Keanu's people are in the venue." "How many are there?" Oliver's eyesight was the best among humans and had been strengthened repeatedly. Now that it had reached a higher level, after receiving Thea's warning, he immediately looked at the scene and found a lot of clues. Don't make a scene. The four of you and Diana each take one of them nearby and deal with them. Don't disturb Mother. After receiving Thea's signal, Felicity had a conflict with a waiter. After many years of being a vice president, she was full of dignity and scolded the waiter until he apologized repeatedly. Thea directly cast a slow spell on the 5 people in the venue. Time was tight, and they couldn't make any big casting movements, so the power of this spell was reduced to the minimum. It could only make them fall into a trance for a while, but that was enough. They split up. There were still 4 enemies in the kitchen, so Thea left them to Batman's team. Seeing that Batman and the others pretended to go to the toilet and led Nightwing, Barbara, and Catwoman to the kitchen, Thea also found her target. With her face almost frozen from smiling, Xianxia, who was dressed as a greeter, was just about to catch her breath when she saw one of her targets, Thea Quinn, walk past her. Just as she was wondering how much money she could earn from this kidnapping, she saw Thea glance at her nonchalantly. Fear instantly welled up in her heart. Her childhood misfortune, everyone rolling their eyes at her, her youth wandering in a gang, her constant defection to new bosses, and her constant betrayal. She had worked so hard to get to where she was today, but everything seemed to have changed between illusion and reality. All her previous experiences were like a dream. She had walked through her life again. A few subtle changes made her feel like she had fallen into an abyss. She was no longer the leader of the triad, but a beggar by the roadside waiting for death. She was still hiding under the bridge in the cold wind, a pitiful person waiting for help. This can't be real. This can't be real. She murmured softly, but her voice was so soft that she couldn't even hear it. Her willpower was not bad. Thea nodded slightly. Many ordinary heroes and villains had stronger willpower than those with superpowers. This was the difference between suddenly gaining power and gradually gaining power. However, this was meaningless. She was now using a new application of supervision and fear. It was an allusion to the Daoist dream of golden millet. However, those were all good dreams. Her modified version was a nightmare, and each time was worse than the last. Xianxia quickly entered her 3rd dream. Her consciousness was stuck in the memories of the past. Subconsciously, she was scared out of her wits. She could no longer tell if her previous glory was still there. Unparalleled fear was rapidly growing in her heart. Finally, after the 6th dream, her willpower was defeated. Her eyes lost focus, her legs went soft, and she fell straight back. For her, a long time had passed, but in fact, only a second had passed in the outside world. As she fell to the ground, Thea, who happened to pass by her, directly grabbed her. She may be malnourished. I'll help her to the side to rest. Facing the curious eyes of the other greeters, Thea explained. They did not suspect anything. This was the metropolitan hero, the winner of the Nobel Prize in Medicine. She was a super-rich person. There was no need to lie to them. They did not know the truth, but they felt that Thea was very humane and a good person. They all looked at her with admiration as she carried Xianxia away. As she began to move, the few people in the banquet hall also moved. In a real battle, no one was afraid of this group of nameless soldiers. However, if they did not want to attract attention, they would need to be prepared. Oh, sorry, I stepped on your foot. My hand slipped. Is your clothes okay? With all kinds of messy excuses, he dragged out all the enemies who had been affected by the slow spell and were dizzy out of the hall, then tied them up and knocked them out. Batman and Superman also moved quickly. In order not to expose the true identity of the heroes, everyone chose to knock the enemies out. The banquet was in progress. They could not leave for too long. Moreover, with more than 40 people tied together, it was too easy to be discovered. Thea directly tied them together and threw them into the portal. On the other side was Oliver's lair. They pretended that nothing had happened and returned to the banquet hall to eat and drink. It was as if the group of more than 40 people did not exist at all. The Christmas banquet was extremely successful. Moira could not stop smiling. There were still many people who understood her intentions. Many people expressed their support for her candidacy. She was so excited that she drank a lot of wine. After the banquet, Thea sent her home and then rushed to Oliver's place to see the results of his interrogation. Superman and Batman did not participate in Star City's affairs. Diana also went home early. Only Oliver's Green Arrow team was left at the scene. Oliver was helpless about his enemy's idiocy today and sent him to his door as a Christmas gift. He had already caught them, so it was impossible to let them go. However, he wanted to know the purpose of the other party tonight. Was it because his true identity was exposed or for other reasons? However, his subordinates did not know anything. No matter how they tried to scare them, it was useless. Brickwall and Canaway were in a deep coma, so there was no way to ask. When Thea arrived, the Green Arrow team was fully armed and wearing masks. They were splashing water on Canaway's face. She did not look at the poor person who accepted her new version of a pipe dream, but looked at the brawny Brickwall. This triad member with the little superpowers seemed to have a bad brain. Thea saw the battle between Superman and them from afar. This guy actually let Superman punch him, so as to test his endurance. In the face of such a sincere request, Superman was a little surprised, but he did not refuse. He used 10% of his strength and gently hit him. Then this guy became the miserable state in front of Thea. Chapter 482. The chest area of his dark black jacket was shattered, and there was a huge fist print on his chest. His special ability allowed his body to slowly recover, but the injury was too heavy, and it would take a lot of time for him to recover to his peak condition. On the other hand, Kianaway's eyes had rolled back, and it was all thanks to Thea. She was lost in her dreams, and she didn't know which was her past and which was an illusion. She struggled in self-denial and finally lost consciousness. In layman's terms, she overused her brain in a short period of time, and it crashed. Kianaway's self-consciousness immediately noticed the abnormality after retracting the fear she had set up. She had a deep impression of what she had experienced, and every detail was unmistakably real, which was a sharp contrast to the false and empty nightmare. She wasn't a beggar on the street, nor was she a tragic and indescribable woman. She was the leader of the triad. Kianaway's consciousness instantly took over her body. Although she was extremely weak and dizzy, she still tried to stand up to defend against the enemy's attack. "Who's there?" Like a patient with a high fever, she stood up shakily and tried to open one eye. When she saw Green Arrow's bow aimed at her, her heart sank. "What are you doing at the city hall?" Oliver, who had a voice changer, pulled the bowstring and asked sternly. "I'm going to the city hall? What am I going to do there?" Kianaway's memory was a little chaotic, and it took her a long time to sort it out. Looking at her companions who were tied up like dumplings, she knew that the operation had failed, but where did it fail? She didn't know that there were a lot of superheroes in the city hall, and she only felt that she had lost unjustly. She had climbed up from the bottom, and she had always believed that failure was the mother of success. If she lost today, she would find the problem and win it back tomorrow. This had always been her creed. But today's operation was really inexplicable. If it was said that the Green Arrow Party had defeated her, she would not believe it at all. Both parties had been fighting for half a year. If the other party had the means to silently capture her, how could she have survived until today? But a wise man knew better than to fight when the odds were against him. She knew too well that she had to admit her mistakes and stand properly when she was beaten. "We're going to kidnap some city officials and extort a sum of money." Oliver was a little incredulous. "You're so courageous that you're going to challenge the world's superheroes, just for a little money?" There was a hint of doubt in his tone. "That's all." Canaway looked at him, puzzled. Her mind spun rapidly as she analyzed the information Oliver had revealed. However, before she could think clearly, she saw a white light flash and she fainted again. Thea knocked her out. It seems to be a coincidence. This girl only knows about the city government's Christmas dinner. She thought it was just an ordinary event in Star City. She didn't expect so many politicians to be there. Oliver could also understand what his sister meant. Moira still had 2 years left in her term as mayor. Today was just a small preliminary test. There was no big publicity. These two unlucky bastards did not know that the vice president and a bunch of senators were present. The so-called democracy and equality were all nonsense. Kidnapping a clerk was a criminal case. Kidnapping the vice president was no different from treason. The vice presidents and members of parliament arrived late. Their informants did not see these people. If they had known the details of today's meeting in advance, they would not have courted death. After the farce was over, Oliver was in charge of whether these unlucky guys would be sent to the police or dealt with. Sia went directly to Diana's apartment in London. It was late at night in London. It was quiet all around. Only the occasional barking of the neighbor's dog could be heard. The dog was immediately appeased by its owner. The crime of disturbing the public was not a joke. At this time in the quiet room, a slight fluctuation woke Thea up. It was the fluctuation of space transmission. Her first reaction was that someone was going to sneak up on her. Then she thought that this movement was not small. The probability of a sneak attack was not high. With her skills, there were not many people on Earth who could defeat her. Besides, Diana was still by her side. Even if Superman came to kill her, she would not be afraid. Diana's reaction was not slow either. The two of them sat up at the same time and looked at the uninvited guest vigilantly. The translucent transmission wave spread out, and a young woman stumbled out. She had short blonde hair and was wearing a shirt, shorts, and a pair of slippers. She held a key tightly in her hand. She looked around in panic. She seemed to sense something and looked at the other side of the bed. For bright eyes were staring at her. "Hi, Diana." The young woman did not know Thea. She only felt that the woman's eyes were too sharp, as if she was trying to see through her organs. It was a little funny. How could a human's eyes see through their organs? The sudden arrival of an unfamiliar environment made her very nervous. Fortunately, she soon found a familiar face. She knew Diana. "Zola? Why are you in my house? I remember that you went back to your hometown." Diana did know this girl. She was a very kind person and had worked for her foundation for a while. I'm at my family's farm. Do you know my farm? It's in Virginia." But a strange blue-skinned man came and said that he wanted to protect me. Then we were attacked. He gave me the key and I'm here. The woman named Zola told Diana the whole story incoherently. She didn't know why she was telling Diana the whole story. She just said it naturally. "She's my employee, or at least my former employee. I think I should help her," Diana explained to Thea. Thea could not say anything. She could only chuckle. The woman in front of her had an identity that even she did not know. She was the reincarnation of Athena. However, Thea could not find any trace of divine power in her. She was just an ordinary person. Her physical characteristics were not obvious. After a while, people would realize that she was pregnant. The result announced to the public was that the stallion, Mr. Zeus, was old but not old. He had given Diana and the others a new brother and sister. The actual situation was that this main god was hiding from his eldest son and putting on a shocking show. The one who was born was not his son, but himself. According to Sia's understanding, his main account could not be leveled up anymore, and his level had been maxed out, so he took this opportunity to level up a side account. If he could get this source in the process, the old god would become a new god, and that would be even better. Thea kept looking at the young woman. She was a little disappointed. She was just an ordinary person, at least before the will of the gods. There were no flaws at all. As for the blue-skinned freak that she mentioned, it should be Hermes. Hermes was the god of speed and thieves in Greek mythology. However, he seemed to be honest, but he had other intentions. Seeing that Diana seemed to want to get involved, Thea could only go with her. She would meet Ares soon and accidentally kill the god of war in battle. Thea had to stop her. Chapter 483. It wasn't because Thea had a close relationship with the god of war, but because the god of war's godhood was a trap. Diana had killed the god of war and automatically obtained the god of war's godhood. 5,000 years ago, this would have been a good thing. However, at this critical juncture where the old god had fallen and the new god had risen, it would be too much of a trap if she didn't become the old god instead of the new one. The girl named Zola watched them change. In the dim light of the night, she felt that Thea looked familiar, but she wasn't sure. She didn't want to say anything, especially after seeing how close the two girls were. How do we get there? Diana asked. I think the key in my hand can take us back, Zola said before Angelina could. Thea glanced at it. It was an exquisite magic item without any traps. She nodded at Diana, and the three teleported away. As soon as they left the teleportation portal, two sharp arrows shot toward them one after the other. With two muffled sounds, Thea and Diana reached out and grabbed an arrow at the same time. They were using the Assassin League's famous grabbing technique. Although the ninja master couldn't win against the two girls even if he did somersaults, his martial arts skills were praiseworthy. Some techniques were very useful at any time. As the person closest to Thea, Diana's martial arts skills were naturally affected. Facing the incoming arrows, the two girls both chose to use the Assassin League's grabbing technique. Casually throwing the arrow on the ground, Zola stepped back in fear. The two girls fearlessly looked at the enemy approaching from the dark. Clatter, clatter. Two tall horses with majestic torsos and slender limbs came out. There was a knight holding a bow on each of the horses. However, when they walked into the night, the three of them finally saw what they looked like. They were not knights at all, but centaurs. The places where the horses' heads should have been were replaced by human bodies. Their upper bodies were covered in mud and blood. The human heads were also twisted out of shape like stomped watermelons. Their eyes were blood red, and the sounds coming out of their mouths were like the howls of humans and the roars of horses. This is not a natural creature. It seems to be the product of some kind of magical transformation, Thea said in disgust. She vaguely remembered that these two were sent by Hera, the Queen of Gods. The Queen of Gods, who was known for her jealousy, naturally wanted to kill Zora, who was pregnant. For these old gods who only stared at her every day, Sia really didn't want to get involved in their affairs. It was just that the noble circle was too messy, like a melodramatic family drama. It would be unreasonable if they didn't perish. However, Diana couldn't run away. According to Hippolyte's original words, this was her innate responsibility. Although Thea didn't want to, she could only helplessly jump in. What a blasphemy against life. Diana carefully sized up the centaur. Its aura was filled with madness and savagery. This thing was clearly beyond saving. One each. The two glanced at each other and instantly understood each other's meaning. Diana attacked first. She threw out her shield and knocked away the arrow. Then, she jumped up and slashed at the centaur's neck. Thea wasn't as powerful as her. These two centaurs only looked ferocious and had their full potential stimulated by magic. They were not afraid of death, but their true strength was not worth mentioning. Thea didn't have good armor. Unlike Diana, who was fully armed, she had only changed into casual clothes. She had many tricks up her sleeve and didn't really want to fight with these dirty centaurs. She opened her jade-white left hand, and a chain made of lightning whizzed out and smashed at the centaur's head. The centaur, who only had killing in its mind, realized that it couldn't take the attack head-on. It half knelt and lowered its body, dodging the chain. At the same time, it drew its bow and shot another arrow at Thea. You want to compete with me in archery? Thea didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Such a crude magic creation wasn't worthy of her shooting back. Go back. With a beautiful irony spell, the arrow quickly changed direction in the air and flew back at an even faster speed. The centaur was caught off guard, and the arrow pierced through its body. Thick, dark blood flowed out continuously. Sia was unforgiving. The lightning chain that she had thrown out earlier was remolded by her, and a spear surrounded by lightning was thrown out by her. She wasn't too sure about the centaur's fatal points, but aiming at the head was usually the right choice. Poochie! The lightning spear pierced a large hole in the center of the centaur's head. The centaur looked like it was drunk as it spun around on the spot. Then, it lost its sense of direction and fell to the ground. Its limbs trembled a few times before it completely lost its breath. Only then did Thea look to the other side. Diana was also very fast. In just a few moves, she found a flaw in the opponent. She dodged the opponent's attack and flew up. Her body drew a beautiful arc in the air. With a light flick of her wrist, the centaur's huge and twisted head was chopped off by her. The two ended the battle at the same time. Zola, who was watching the show, remembered the blue-skinned monster who saved her and hurried back to her room. The two girls finished off their enemies and confirmed that they were dead. Then, they followed Zola into the room. The first thing they saw when they entered the room was a man lying on the ground. He was blue all over and dressed in tattered clothes like a beggar. The most eye-catching thing about him was that he had a pair of bird claws where his feet should have been. This was Hermes, no Hermes. However, this god who was famous for his speed wasn't in a good condition. A crude spear that was similar to the one worn by the two centaurs outside the door pierced through his body. The god of speed was lying on the ground, his breathing barely discernible. He's really good at acting. He really put in a lot of effort to make this family drama go smoothly. Sia thought to herself. She could tell with a few casual glances that the other party was really injured, and very seriously at that. This Hermes was much weaker than she had initially thought. Although the two centaurs at the door were powerful, it depended on who they were compared to. They were definitely invincible against ordinary people, and any slightly more powerful hero could kill them. At least, Thea felt that Oliver wouldn't have to spend too much effort to deal with the two centaurs. If he called his archery club over, he would be able to kill them without any losses. The two magically modified centaurs were such weak opponents, but they had almost killed the god of speed and thieves of the Greek pantheon. Who would believe it if they told others? Divine power couldn't be offended easily, but it didn't bother to hide it either. Hermes was faking it, but his true strength was indeed so low that it hurt people's hearts. Even though he tried his best to hide it, one could still estimate his general strength. Thea felt that she could fight 3 or 4 opponents of this level even if she counted his hidden strength. It was important to know that he was one of the 12 main gods at his peak and had once blessed Diana. Now, his divine power was like a candle in the wind, let alone Diana. He could die if he used a little more strength. Chapter 484. Thea felt that she really didn't understand their thoughts. You're already like this. Why don't you just lie down in your god's kingdom? Why do you have to jump out and cause trouble, and then show everyone what it means to struggle at death's door? Thea, see if you can save him. Diana still had some feelings for these gods who had blessed her in the past. She checked Hermes' wound and found that it was very serious, but she wasn't worried. She was originally very talented, and she had also received Morgan Le Fay's magic experience. There was almost no one in the world who could surpass Thea in healing. Diana was very confident in her lover's ability. Hermes, who was lying on the ground with his eyes closed and pretending to be a dead dog, was seriously injured. He didn't know that Diana not only came according to his plan, but also brought another person with her. He had a bad feeling in his heart. This person who suddenly came in might ruin his plan, and this made him very anxious. But now he was seriously injured. Previously, he had pretended to be unconscious. It was unrealistic to immediately jump up to see who this unexpected participant was. No one was more stupid than the other. When the time came, the other person would know that he was pretending, and now he didn't have the strength to jump up. Under his imagination, he had to pretend to be unconscious. This was really a test for his acting skills. He was very anxious, but he had to suppress his consciousness in the depths of his mind. As long as his body showed a slight tremor, Diana would be able to find out that he was pretending to be dead. After all, he also had Athena's blessing, and it wasn't so easy to fool him. Then he heard a clear female voice reply to Diana, and then a warm magic wrapped around his wound. Hermes realized that his plan was in vain. This plan had just started, and there was a huge change. Diana had a demigod who was good at healing. Who was this guy? Unlike Hercules, although Hercules was trapped by the giants for thousands of years, he didn't experience the twilight of the gods. Now, except for a little mental problem, his divine power was basically intact compared to ancient times. Those who hid in their god's kingdom were different. They became gods with the help of faith, and the connection between their god's kingdom and the secular world was too deep and tight. After sleeping for so many years, every minute and every second in the material world was actually wearing down their foundation. It was like a slow suicide. When they finally woke up from their sleep and learned that Zeus, the god king, had disappeared, several gods who were unwilling to die had a new plan. Compared to their heyday, their strength had fallen greatly. Although Poseidon, Hades, and the other big shots were living a tight life, they still had some food at home, and they could last for a long time. As the god of speed and thieves, Hermes couldn't. He didn't know that a year later, there would be something called the god of speed that would deny the meaning of his existence as the god of speed at the level of the rules, resulting in his complete fall. He vaguely felt that he had very little time left, and an invisible sword had fallen on his neck. He was both a chess piece and a chess player. He wanted to survive in the chaos, but his plan was very good. He considered several possibilities and even designed several emergency plans. However, he never expected that such a big change like Theo would jump out in the first act. There must be someone who knew about the relationship between Thea and Diana, but this group of old gods who had just climbed out of their god's kingdom didn't know. They were proud and arrogant. Hermes didn't have much divine power left. He just roughly checked the information and began to put on today's big show. Thea's divine power was that of a real demigod, and there was a vague shadow of the Greek divine power. This couldn't be faked at all. Hermes had to do a deeper analysis. Could it be that old woman Hippolyte had deceived all the gods? At that time, Diana wasn't the only child but two? Otherwise, it really didn't make sense. In an era when the gods had retired, other than Diana, there was also a young and lively demigod wandering in the world. This was too incredible. Although it was incredible, a warm and vigorous magic power that was full of vitality directly healed his wound. It was not suitable for him to lie on the ground and pretend to be a dead dog. Hermes regretted it so much that his intestines turned green, but he still pretended to be in a trance and opened his eyes. "You are." Although he was mainly looking at Diana from the corner of his eyes, he still glanced at Sia, who had a stern expression and an outstanding temperament. Her calm gaze seemed to carry a bit of scrutiny. Thea's eyes met Hermes's eyes. The god of speed and thieves felt a little scared. How could this be? No matter how weak he was still one of the main gods. How could he feel scared? He must have thought too much before and felt a little guilty. Hermes didn't know that his feelings of fear had already merged with Thea's eyes. He thought that he was just thinking too much. His eyes flashed and he subconsciously avoided Thea. Although he felt that there was a big mistake in his plan, he still tried to continue the act. He staggered a few steps and found that Thea had healed him very well. Both demigods had sharp eyes. It was not a good idea to pretend to be a cripple. He cleared his throat. "You are Diana, the daughter of the Amazon. I've seen you before. You shouldn't have come here. Take this girl and run to the end of the earth. Otherwise, she will die in front of the god queen." His words were prepared in advance, but he regretted it as soon as he said them. Thea naturally caught his flaw and said very sincerely, "You are Hermes, the god of speed. Your speed is the best among the gods. We will cover you. Take this woman and leave first." Hermes wanted to give himself 2 tight slaps. He was indeed an idiot. What should he do now? Say that he was not fast enough? Humans could brag, but he was a god. If he said that he was not fast enough, he would be finished in minutes. There was no room for discussion. This was the limit of the rules. If he said that he was not fast enough, it was equivalent to giving up his clergy. The consequences were too serious. Just as he was thinking of a solution, Diana's interruption saved him temporarily. "God Queen? The God Queen you were talking about is Hera?" "Yes, Hera's power is everywhere. Her jealousy is also unparalleled, so—" He did not continue. What should he say next? Thea laughed out loud. She was everywhere. What was he bragging about? He was just borrowing the power of the divine artifact. Olympus had a divine mirror that observed everything in the world. This was the source of his understanding of everything. Since the beginning of the battle with the centaurs, she had felt a vague prying. Hermes felt that Thea's laughter was a little harsh. "Young man, don't underestimate the God Queen. She has unimaginable divine power." "Is that so?" Through continuous measurement and reverse monitoring, Thea had a rough idea of the other party's location. He seemed to be in another plane. Was that the public area of the Greek gods, Mount Olympus? Chapter 485. She used her supervision to the extreme, and a huge amount of magic power poured into her eyes. With the help of her opponent's artifact channel, her gaze pierced through the space barrier and made eye contact with the middle-aged, luxurious woman in peacock feathers. Hera, the god queen who was watching them, didn't expect to be attacked. The orange energy with fear hit her directly. Even a god couldn't resist fear, especially someone like her who didn't even have 1/10 of her original strength and wasn't known for her strong will. However, her immortal life still gave her a huge bonus. Her pride as a god didn't let her fall into self-denial like Kanavi. She reached out with difficulty and closed the channel of the artifact mirror. Is this Hera? Sia secretly mocked Hera. Hera, who had a bad reputation, had been seen through by Sia in just a short exchange. She would be bragging if she said that Hera couldn't withstand a single blow, but she wasn't invincible. Also, Thea felt that Hera was more like a mage than a god. She didn't know if Hera didn't have enough divine power to begin with or if there was another reason. She wanted to teleport over directly, but Hera reacted quickly and decisively closed the channel. The location of Olympus was not the same as the traditional concept of space. Without an accurate coordinate, she did not dare to rashly teleport. The feeling of being watched disappeared. Other than Zola, who was still a normal person, everyone could feel it. Hermes didn't know what happened, but he knew that Hera didn't stop watching because she was kind and valued peace. Seeing that Diana was staring at him and was about to throw Zola to him, Hermes had a lot of thoughts. He actually came up with an excuse. He immediately said, "I'll take Zola, but Hera has already noticed Paradise Island. You have to remind your mother to be careful." Then he pretended to leave. As expected, Diana immediately became alert when she heard the name Paradise Island. She grabbed Hermes' arm and asked nervously, "Paradise Island? You mean Hera has already seen my mother?" When Thea heard Hermes mention Paradise Island, she knew that things were bad. Hera had just lost, and it was inevitable that she would go to Paradise Island to vent her anger. Hera had turned the Amazons into snakes and turned Hippolyte into a stone statue. Who knew what choice she would make in this time and space, and it was better to be safe than sorry. Hippolyte and the others couldn't stop Hera at this time, even if Hera's strength was greatly reduced. If Diana wanted to go home, she couldn't stop her at all. She even had to agree, which made her sigh secretly. Hermes, who felt that Diana had fallen into his trap, wanted to howl at the sky. After spending a long time and countless brain cells dying, things finally returned to normal. "Thea, I want to go back. What do you think?" Diana hurriedly asked for her lover's opinion. Thea certainly couldn't object, but she also wouldn't jump into the enemy's ambush unprepared. Being able to win was one thing, but fighting to the death was another. She would be a fool if she didn't make use of her helpers. "Excuse me, how many gods have awakened now?" She asked the god of speed and thieves, who was known for being well-informed. Asking for information was his business scope. If he didn't know anything, it would be too suspicious. Hermes was a little hesitant, but he still answered, "Hera, the god of sun, Ares, the god of war, Eris, the goddess of strife, and Pluto and Neptune should have awakened." This guy only said most of it, but he didn't say anything about Demeter, the goddess of agriculture, who had colluded with him. He also didn't mention the goddess of moon, who had been Thea's boss for a short time, but Thea didn't feel the signal of the goddess of moon's arrival. Did she feel that she had enough divine power and didn't get involved in this matter? Thea felt that this was good news. After all, the goddess of moon still had a relationship with her, and it was always not good to fight with her. Ares. Diana didn't talk about Ares as if he had killed her father like 100 years ago, but her face didn't look too good either. Thea was analyzing the strengths and weaknesses of these people. The world had been peaceful for a long time, and coupled with the heavy blow 100 years ago, Ares's recent situation was worrying. The goddess of strife and the goddess of agriculture were not famous for fighting, and the only thing they needed to be wary of was the god of sun, Apollo. Unlike the goddess of moon, whose belief was scarce, the sun was an important prerequisite for the survival of the Earth's species. Even if it wasn't ancient times, and no one in modern society believed in the god of sun, the accumulated belief still existed. As for his combat strength, Thea was a little uncertain. If the two of them fought against 4 or 5 weak gods at the same time, it was really difficult to predict the outcome. Especially with the combat strength of the god of sun, she couldn't guarantee that she could defeat him. Fortunately, this world was full of surprises. 30 years ago, an alien spaceship landed on Earth and showed the Earthlings what the Kryptonian style was. Thea's idea was to find a Kryptonian to fight the god of Sunday. Considering that they were going to fight on Paradise Island, they rejected all men, and Superman was directly excluded. Between Supergirl and Fiora, Thea chose Supergirl. This didn't mean that Fiora's combat strength was weak, but she couldn't walk away. In addition, Fiora's personality was too old-fashioned, and she wasn't suitable for the equally old-fashioned women of Paradise Island. On the contrary, the silly and ignorant Supergirl was very suitable, and Thea remembered that she had been to Paradise Island in the original time and space, so there shouldn't be too much of a problem. She told Diana that she was looking for reinforcements. She wasn't quite sure why Thea was so cautious, but they had been lovers for many years, so she chose to believe her. She also knew Supergirl, but they weren't familiar with each other. Thea quickly contacted Kara Danvers, who was studying in Nathaniel. The two had a good relationship. Thea treated her like a younger sister and often took her out to eat. She had to say that Kryptonians and Psions had something in common: they could eat too much. Just casually treating her to a meal, and the number of swiping a credit card was chilling. Ordinary rich people couldn't afford to eat like that. Kara Danvers came quickly. She was wearing blue tights, red boots, and a red cloak with a big S on her chest. Thea imitated Superman's clothes. Although they weren't as good as the one that Superman's father gave him, they were still of good quality and were more than enough to deal with ordinary battles. How is it? Isn't it very cool? Speaking of which, this was Supergirl's first time wearing her exclusive equipment in a battle. She flew very fast, and when she arrived at the location, she did not land immediately. Instead, she flew 2 rounds in the sky with her red cloak before landing. After greeting Diana, she asked Sia happily. Thea had plenty of ways to deal with this kind of older lowly. She coaxed and praised Supergirl until she burst out laughing. Hermes's expression was a little strange. At first, he didn't know what he was waiting for and thought that Diana had seen through his trap. He pretended to take Zora away first several times, but Diana stopped him and hoped that they would act together. Only then did he relax. Then he learned that there were reinforcements, so he could only wait quietly. Chapter 486. The arrival of Supergirl puzzled Hermes even more. There was no doubt that this girl did not have any divine power. Although Hermes's strength was now extremely weak, he was still sharp because of his past achievements. It was true that she did not have any divine power, but this woman was too strong. Her body was surging with energy, and her body structure was perfect to the extreme. Furthermore, this fellow's flying speed was extremely fast. Even when Hermes was at his peak, he might not be much faster than her. Would this woman be the culprit that would kill Hermes in the future? Hermes felt that he had tricked Diana into coming out today because he did not check the almanac. Accidents kept happening one after another. Thea did not pay much attention to Supergirl's thoughts. She discussed with Diana in a low voice. No matter what the road ahead is, we can crush it with our strength. Let's go back to Paradise Island first. Supergirl was very excited when she heard that they were going to Diana's hometown. When she knew that they might encounter enemies, she was even happier. The Kryptonian genes in her had been ignited by Fiora. She was so excited that she clenched her fists. This scene made Hermes's heart sink. He did not know about the existence of Kryptonians. He could only wonder if all the mortals were so strong and aggressive. What happened to the reverence for the gods? He had to continue playing the role of a spy. He patted his chest with righteous indignation and promised that he would not leave Zola and the child in her belly. Supergirl accidentally saw the child with her X-ray vision. Hermes, who had originally planned to keep the child as a trump card, was speechless. If he did not have only 1 year left to live, he would have gone back to his god's kingdom and become a corpse. Compared to Diana and Thea, Kara Danvers was at least a demigod. In Hermes' eyes, Thea might even have the bloodline of Zeus. But who was Kara Danvers? There was no divine power in Hermes' eyes, but this ordinary person's performance was too amazing. Hermes felt that no matter what he said or did, he would give himself away. He began to pretend to be invisible, but his injuries were healed by Thea. He could not pretend to be invisible even if he wanted to. If it were not for Diana, who was worried about Paradise Island, she would have discovered his problem. However, Thea had no intention of exposing him. This was not a game where him would drop a piece of equipment after him was killed. His clothes were torn and his pants were torn. Only his staff was a good item. It was a teleportation staff that ignored time and space. However, his staff was too closely connected to him. It was similar to Diana's silver bracelet of protection. Thea only glanced at him from the corner of her eye and stopped paying attention to him. Decades ago, Diana had returned to Paradise Island once. However, she did not have a good talk with Hippolyte. Most likely, Hippolyte had ordered her not to return to Paradise Island unless there was an emergency. Now, no matter what happened on Paradise Island, Diana had a proper reason to go back. With Thea by her side, there was no need to fly back. The two women's foreheads were close to each other. Diana passed a complicated coordinate of Paradise Island to Thea. This coordinate was extremely complicated. As a pure warrior, she could not understand it. Diana had to admire her mother's foresight. Thea had the same idea. She had only asked about Paradise Island once a long time ago. Seeing Diana's hesitation, she knew that Hippolyte must have given Diana a gag order in advance to prevent her from talking about Paradise Island. In the end, this old woman still treated Thea as an outsider. Being a member of the Amazon was nothing. If it were not for the fact that she was Diana's mother, Thea would not care about her at all. Hermes, who lowered his head and pretended to be invisible, found that Supergirl had been staring at him with a pair of big eyes. He smiled awkwardly. "Are you an alien?" Supergirl pointed at the bird's claws where Hermes' feet were supposed to be. Poor old god. How would he know anything about Earthlings and aliens? His brain, which used to be extremely witty, was now a mess. He could neither admit nor deny it. He could only smile and deal with it. This guy was a fool. Supergirl frowned her cute eyebrows and came to this conclusion. She looked at him with a little sympathy and patted him on the shoulder to encourage him. So strong. Supergirl's strength was far less natural than Superman's. These two pats almost caused Hermes internal injuries. He decided that he could not stay here any longer. He had to leave quickly. He took out his cane and was ready to volunteer. However, before he could say a word, Thea quickly and elegantly drew a fixed teleportation portal on the spot. With the coordinates provided by Diana and the portal being on Earth, Thea quickly finished drawing the teleportation portal. After checking it briefly, she stepped into it. Supergirl had already seen Thea's teleportation many times. She walked into the teleportation portal valiantly. "Come quickly," Diana called out to the remaining two people before entering the portal. Zola did not know where she was going or what she had to do. However, Thea, Diana, and Supergirl all looked kind. Compared to Hermes's beggar-like image, the three girls were more believable. Zola followed them and went through the portal. Hermes wanted to cry but had no tears. What was this? He could tell that Diana did not take him seriously at all. She would not trust him either. However, he still had to continue this act. He swore in his heart that they would regret it later. He put away the ferocious expression on his face and returned to his weak self. He also followed Zola through the portal. As soon as he walked through the portal, he heard Supergirl, who seemed to be his nemesis, yelling about how warm the beach was and how beautiful the mountain was. Diana was delighted to hear that. Who wouldn't say that their hometown was good? Diana was already very friendly to Supergirl, and now she was explaining in detail to her. She talked about how she had climbed the mountains there when she was young, and how Antiope had trained her in combat by the sea many years ago. She even mentioned that this place wasn't far from the place where Steve Trevor had crashed. Diana even briefly recounted the great battle back then. However, after 10 minutes, she gradually fell silent and looked at Thea. "Mother should know that I've returned to the island. Why haven't they appeared yet?" Thea was also puzzled. The anti-magic spell is still in effect here. My supervision is not working here. Kara's probably not working either. Let's search with our naked eyes. The three of them immediately rose into the air and looked in 3 different directions. Kara, who had always been lucky, was the first to discover their target. There are many people in the southwest by the sea. Diana was very worried. She did not have time to greet the two onlookers on the ground and flew over first. Follow me. Thea waved at the two on the ground and chased after Zola with Kara. Can you fly? Zola, who felt that her worldview had been shattered, looked at Hermes uneasily. She still did not know why she had come here. She only knew that the fanatic Superman impersonator had looked at her stomach and said that she was pregnant. How could it be so exaggerated? She did not even notice it. How could that woman in blue tights and red cloak see through it? Chapter 487. Zola didn't want to follow them, but she didn't know where to go. There didn't seem to be any taxis nearby, so she could only ask Hermes for help. The god of speed and thieves was so angry that his nose almost went crooked. When this old man was circling the earth at the speed of light, these women were still nowhere to be found. He forced himself to hold it in. Of course I can fly. He bitterly followed them with Zola in his arms. However, after flying for a short distance, Zola had another question. You don't seem to fly as fast as them. She wasn't a scientist and didn't have a speed detector, but she had seen the sonic boom when Supergirl flew. As someone who had received modern education, she could tell that Supergirl was at least close to the speed of sound. On the other hand, Hermes, who was carrying her, was flying slowly and unsteadily. The difference between their speeds was like comparing a wooden plane to a fifth-generation fighter jet. Hermes wanted to let go of her and drop her to death, but it was just a thought. There were too many implications and he couldn't handle it with his small arms and legs. Zola pestered him twice and could only force herself to answer. If she said that she wasn't as good as others, especially in the field of speed, she would die at any moment. Luckily, Hermes was smart and quickly thought of a key point. He said earnestly, I'm doing this for you. Your body can't withstand the impact of high speed. Don't worry, they'll be fine. Let's fly slowly. Zola felt that it made sense and accepted the answer without hesitation. Not to mention the two who were flying slowly, the three women had already landed. Supergirl was the fastest, followed by Diana, and Thea, who didn't have her light ring, was the last. Mother. Diana saw Hippolyte standing in front of everyone at a glance, and the strong goddess of war also shed tears. The innocent Supergirl also seemed to think of her family and was a bit sad. Thea didn't have such rich emotions. She first looked at the opposite side. The woman standing in front of her was none other than Hera, who had exchanged blows with her from a distance 10 minutes ago. At this moment, the Divine Empress was dressed to the nines. She wore an emerald green floor-length dress and a cloak woven from peacock feathers. This cloak was of a very high grade and was at least a high-grade divine artifact. The bracelets and earrings she wore on her person all had divine artifact fluctuations. At this moment, Hera looked majestic as she looked at the people of Paradise Island as if she was looking at a group of ants. The javelins and bows of the female warriors were like toys in her eyes, not worth her attention at all. On his left was a purple-skinned man. This man did not wear any artifacts and was dressed in cheap clothes from a street stall. Thea estimated that this guy's clothes did not cost more than $5. However, his casual attitude made Thea even more vigilant. He did not need any artifacts, which meant that he had a deep background. Compared to him, the fully armed Hera was a little inferior. If he wasn't mistaken, this man was the sun god Apollo. The woman on Hera's right was very interesting. Compared to the sun god and the divine empress, this woman had no fighting spirit. She wore a miniskirt, revealing a large part of her lotus-colored skin. She looked at everyone frivolously. The divine empress Hera, the sun god Apollo, the goddess of strife Eris. Thea nodded secretly. The goddess of agriculture and her old friend Ares were not here. She could totally deal with this lineup. Seeing that Diana and Hippolyte had a few simple words, Thea, who was relieved, also turned to salute Hippolyte. Just like how Diana treated Moira, she also saluted Hippolyte as a junior to an elder. Long time no see, Your Majesty. Your body is still healthy. Congratulations. You too, partner of Diana. You're also my child. I sincerely thank you for your selfless help to Diana. Seeing that Hera and the others had no intention of attacking, Thea and Hippolyte chatted for a while before introducing Supergirl. "This is our friend, Kara Danvers, who is like my sister." Thea pulled Supergirl over and introduced her. "Paradise Island also welcomes you. I can see that you are a brave warrior and a good child." Thea could also guess what Hippolyte was thinking. Paradise Island had suffered a great calamity. At this time, she would welcome anyone who came to help. Moreover, Supergirl looked silly and simple, which was more in line with the Amazon tradition. "Have you discussed the order of death? Hades is waiting for you." Hera spoke first in an overbearing manner. "Who is going to talk to her?" Thea and Diana glanced at Hippolyte and found that the queen was a little ashamed. As a mistress, she was indeed a little guilty when facing the main wife. It didn't seem appropriate for Diana to talk. As the daughter of Zeus, at least nominally, Hera had jurisdiction over her. The people of the present generation didn't care, but the ancient Amazons were very restrained. Now that she could talk to the guardian of the universe, Thea didn't have any scruples with the improvement of her strength. She stepped out first. "Your Majesty, no one will die today because of the battle. I'm very sure of this." Her words caused Hera's gaze to shift from Diana. She sensed a little and found out. Wasn't this the person who fought with her 10 minutes ago? At that time, things happened in a hurry. She didn't even see clearly whether the enemy was a man or a woman. Now, she could finally take a closer look. There was no doubt about the level of a demigod. However, Hera couldn't tell which divine system the other party was from. It seemed to have the shadow of the Greek divine system. She could also see traces of the Egyptian divine system. She couldn't make a judgment for a while. Thea had transformed into a hero spirit several times. She had already converted all the divine power. Without tracing back to the source, she couldn't see clearly. Right now, she was like a newly born demigod. Even Hera, who grasped the authority of the gods, couldn't see through her origins. However, the arrogant Hera still glanced at her. "You can't save them, even with the help of that Amazon." Hera glanced at the two demigods. On the other side, the Supergirl was completely ignored by her. "How about we go outside the island to fight? It's hard to fight here." Thea didn't like the environment of Paradise Island. Once she entered, more than half of her magic power was sealed. However, her physical fitness was still there. She didn't know if the restrictions on the island were loosened or if it was Hera's doing. Plus, she didn't want to fight with Hera. It was meaningless. If you want to kill the firstborn, go ahead. As long as you don't involve Diana, you can fight freely behind closed doors. However, the other party didn't intend to be kind at all. Hera sneered and took out a dark brown seal with lightning engravings. She crushed it with a malicious sneer. Thea, who could be called a great sorcerer in ancient times, immediately sensed that the anti-magic enchantment of Paradise Island had lost its effect. Her supervision magic power was restored. Chapter 488. What followed was a heart-palpitating pain, but this feeling came and went quickly. Thea realized that something was wrong and hurriedly retreated. She saw the Amazons with arrows and guns lying on the ground. Hippolyte was half kneeling on the ground, and even Diana was holding on with a painful expression. This was a special countermeasure set up to target the enchantment of Paradise Island and its residents. Thea instantly understood that the heart-palpitating feeling was because she had also lived on the island for half a year. However, this little magic impact was nothing to Thea, and she returned to normal in 2 breaths. Now, only Supergirl and herself were in good condition. "How are you?" Thea had no time to care about the people on Paradise Island. She first checked on Diana. She tried to use a few healing spells, but unfortunately, the effect was not great. The opponent targeted the entire island, and the closer the connection with the island, the greater the damage. The female warriors directly fainted. Antiope and Hippolyte were barely conscious, but the two of them could not recover their combat power in a short time. With Thea's continuous healing and a part of her willpower, Diana's condition was slightly stabilized, but she could not fight for a long time. "You rest first, leave this to me." She, who had fully recovered her magic, did not mind fighting a few rounds with Hera. Just when Thea was about to open her mouth to ask for a fight, Apollo stood up proudly and said without turning his head, "Hera, You still like to use those little tricks. Are these mortals worth my effort? Or are you at the same level as them? Apollo, you have to respect me, I am the queen of gods. Hera felt that Apollo's words were too harsh and roared with extreme dissatisfaction, but her voice was a little weak. Apollo snorted coldly and looked at the enemy opposite him. He shook his head at the pale face of Diana and ignored Supergirl. He looked at Thea with some curiosity. Your strength is not bad. Do you want to be my opponent? Thea did not mind fighting a few rounds with him. She could more or less absorb sunlight, but the effect was not as strong as the Kryptonians. However, if she were to face Apollo, then Hera, who was proficient in magic, would naturally be left to Supergirl. This wasn't the best plan. Thea sneered. Beat my sister first. Kara, teach him a lesson. Ah? Apollo wasn't the only one who was surprised. Even Supergirl herself was a little surprised. That purple-skinned guy in front of her looked so arrogant. Could she do it? Don't worry, he's no match for you. When Thea saw the bitter look on Supergirl's face, she hurriedly cheered her on. Then, without giving her any time to react, she pushed her out. Other than the parallax monster that had wreaked havoc in Seaside City and the giant Axeman's attack, this could be said to be Supergirl's third serious battle. She clenched her fists tightly, and her chest, which was not considered large, appeared slightly curved due to her deep breaths. After a period of hard training by Fiora, Supergirl's fighting style was finally starting to look a little better. She was no longer using the standard farmer fighting style of the Iyer family. Instead, she was now in an offensive and defensive posture, waiting for the enemy to attack first. Ha! Supergirl's slightly nervous look made Apollo laugh. He laughed while pointing at Supergirl. A child. They actually sent a child to be my opponent. Pay attention to the strength of your attack. Just kill a mortal and leave the rest to me. I want to properly deal with them. Hera said fiercely. Apollo shook his head with some pity. He looked at Supergirl, who was so nervous that her eyes were a little straight. What value did an opponent like her have to prove that she was worthy of inheriting the throne of the God King? It was extremely boring. He originally thought that there would be a big battle on Paradise Island, but he didn't expect Hera to use her ultimate move. Apollo was very frustrated that he couldn't show off his power as the sun god. He swung his hand and a scorching ball of light was thrown at Supergirl. In Apollo's impression, no mortal could withstand his attack. He lost interest and walked back. However, after taking 2 steps, he realized that something was wrong. He stopped and turned around abruptly. When the dust settled, he saw that Supergirl was still in the same position. Apollo's attack was fast and ruthless. She didn't even have time to react before she was hit. However, the opponent's fierce attack didn't hurt Supergirl. She wasn't very sensitive to her own energy. She only vaguely felt that she had gained some benefits. But how was this possible? This purple-skinned guy in front of her was obviously very powerful. Why didn't he hurt her? Supergirl, who had little combat experience, didn't think about the problem of sunlight. If it were Superman or Fiora, they would have understood immediately. She had little combat experience, but Apollo had plenty of combat experience. However, he didn't know about the Kryptonians. Looking at Supergirl cautiously guarding against her, she, who believed herself to be intelligent, was truly confused. She, who had been through hundreds of battles, was very certain that she had hit her opponent. However, seeing that Supergirl was completely unharmed, she couldn't help but wonder what was going on. Since he couldn't figure it out, he decided to fire again. This time, Apollo was serious. He bent his body slightly, bent his arm, and made a gesture of accumulating energy. Then he raised his right hand. A dark yellow energy beam filled with a lot of light and heat was thrown at Supergirl. This time, it wasn't a sudden attack. Supergirl reacted quickly. According to her previous combat experience, she should have retaliated or dodged the attack with heat rays. However, her combat instinct told her that she didn't need to retaliate. She just needed to take the attack head-on. It was safe and harmless. Supergirl, who was very simple, was confused. However, relying on combat instinct was the style of the Iyer family. Without thinking, she closed her eyes and slammed into the energy beam head-on. Boom! There was a loud bang. Apollo was completely dumbfounded when he saw that Supergirl was once again unscathed except for a little bit of mess on her body. He had already predicted several possible responses from her, such as dodging or counterattacking. These choices were not strange at all. However, Supergirl's reaction really surprised him. How did she deal with it? She was stunned for a moment and chose to use her body to take the attack head-on. Apollo didn't know what to say. Thea saw this scene and laughed out loud. Diana, who also knew about the Kryptonians' characteristics, also smiled. At this time, she realized that her opponent's attack couldn't hurt her. Instead, it replenished her energy. Supergirl was simple, but she wasn't stupid. She also guessed that her opponent's attack had something to do with the yellow sun. Supergirl's body had absorbed all the energy contained in the two attacks. Now, her energy had increased by at least 10%. If this energy was exposed to the sun, it would take at least half a year. Supergirl, who had always been troubled by the fact that Superman was stronger than her, seemed to have seen the wonderful scene of her teaching her cousin a lesson. She laughed happily. Chapter 489. What the hell are you laughing at? The three of them mocked him one after another, and Apollo's face darkened. As a general of the Greek pantheon and now the self-proclaimed successor of the god king, Apollo was furious. The energy in his body surged, and golden flames spewed out of his eyes, mouth, ears, and nose. Apollo's expression was ferocious. This island had looked down on his authority, and he wanted to sink Paradise Island. In your dreams. Thea swung her hand and shot a shadow arrow. Since Apollo was full of light energy, the shadow arrow could delay him for a moment, and naturally, he could not launch his next attack. Hera's reaction was not slow either. She seemed to be in the lead, but her divine power was far inferior to Apollo's. Seeing Thea blocking her, she did not want to be outdone and shot a water arrow to counter the shadow arrow. Thea immediately returned the favor. Spells of various colors covered the sky and covered the earth as she threw them over. The goddess of strife, Eris, was sneering at the side, and had no intention of interfering. Hera could only brace herself. As the queen of Zeus and the mother of most of the main gods in name, she was very accomplished in magic. If not for the fact that she had lost too much, Thea would not have been able to defeat her. The two of them began an intense magic exchange, and on the other side, Supergirl also began to attack Apollo. Boom! There was an explosion. Apollo's attack was not completed in the end, and he was interrupted by Supergirl before he could accumulate more than half of his energy. However, his use of divine power was very unique. He moved the center of the energy explosion to the front, which was between himself and Supergirl. His plan was good. His own energy could not hurt himself, but Supergirl would not be able to take it head-on, right? However, the result made him collapse. He was indeed fine, but Supergirl was fine too. The adorable Supergirl's energy increased by a lot, and the scene of her teaching her cousin Superman a lesson appeared in her mind. The little girl was very excited, and she threw a punch at Apollo's face with great force. The power of Apollo's ultimate move was indeed extraordinary. Although the center of the explosion was between him and Supergirl, there were still some aftershocks that wreaked havoc in all directions. Hera lightly shook the peacock feather coat on her body to block the impact. Sia herself could absorb sunlight and had no defense. However, the people of Paradise Island did not have the ability to do so. Diana was a pure warrior, and she could not defend such a large area. Thea could only hurriedly set up a defensive shield to block Apollo's remaining energy impact. However, this distraction allowed Hera to gain the upper hand. I can handle it. Seeing that Diana wanted to help, Thea stopped her. The attitude of the goddess of strife, Eris, was unclear. As a reserve, Diana could not play. Several energies gathered in his body, and he raised his hand to send a bolt of lightning towards Hera. Unexpectedly, the other party was instantly enraged. I'm Zeus's wife. How dare you use lightning against me? It turned out that Hera, as the wife of Zeus, also knew lightning spells, but she didn't usually use them. Thea exchanged a few blows with Hera and found that the lightning spells made Hera a little hysterical and made her lose her judgment. Thea was secretly pleased and quietly turned the situation around. Diana stared at Eris, the goddess of strife, with full concentration. However, Eris did not help. Instead, she took out a glass of wine from the void and drank it leisurely. From time to time, she would say a few sarcastic words. "Mother, be careful. Do you need your daughter's help? Little girl in the red cloak, be careful. Apollo is going to hit your shoulder." From her long-winded words, one could not tell which side she was on. It seemed that the victory of either side had nothing to do with her. Diana threw out the lasso of truth. She did not resist and continued to say what she wanted to say. If one did not consider that her power was much higher than the rule of truth, it meant that every word she said was true. She wanted to instigate everyone to continue fighting, and the more heated the fight, the better. When she saw that someone's momentum was weak, she would start to instigate with her 3-inch tongue. She would only stop when both sides were fighting in full swing. Diana tried to block his mouth, but it was of no use. His voice was still transmitted to the few of them. Conflict and instigation, this was her priesthood, her nature. Of the 4 people in the field, Hera and Apollo were naturally familiar with her style. Thea was bombarded by the media, but it went in one ear and out the other. Supergirl was affected a lot. Fortunately, she had the absolute upper hand, so the impact was not too great. Apollo was very depressed. With many years of battle experience, he could still see that the opponent had a physique that absorbed sunlight. Although this type of enemy was rare, it was not like he had never seen it before. Not to mention those far away, he could see that Thea also had such a physique. However, the physique that absorbed sunlight in Apollo's impression was completely different from the one in the red cloak in front of him. She absorbed it too quickly and used it at a high rate. The two of them exchanged more than 10 blows. Apollo had used up 20% of his energy, while the opponent had increased it by 20%. His own energy had become someone else's energy almost without any loss. How could he continue fighting? If Supergirl were to use energy attacks like heat rays, Apollo would be able to suck them back. However, Supergirl was determined not to let Apollo use his ultimate move. She decided to use physical attacks to fight in close combat, causing Apollo to suffer greatly. He was the sun god. In order to pursue the purity of power, he had also eliminated impurities like Thea. Now, he only had light element attacks. He could not win in close combat, and his energy attacks were absorbed. In addition, Eris would spout nonsense from time to time. Apollo was so frustrated that he wanted to bang his head against the wall. He wanted to change opponents with Thea. He had seen her physique. She could only absorb a part of the light. As long as he increased his energy output, he would definitely be able to injure her. Although it was very tiring to fight, he could at least hit her a few times. The Supergirl in front of him was beating him to the point that he could not fight back at all. Apollo hurriedly gave Hera a look. Then he despaired. Hera was